Chapter 1895. Nyetian frowned. This guard was too arrogant. He actually dared to attack Nyetian. An ant-like person wants to go to Evil Wind Island? Ridiculous. The guard growled. Then, the sword aura around him surged and pressed down on Nyetian. Watch out, Nyetian! Jian Jingyun and Ghost Wushan cried out simultaneously. He was an early paramount god, but his Tao of the sword was only in the quintessence of the sword. He was at least 100,000 years old, so it wasn't strange for him to have such strength. Nyetian's eyes narrowed. Terrifying black runes surged out of him, and his aura surged. His sword aura surged and surged. Bang! The two sword auras collided in midair, and a muffled sound rang out. The guard's figure trembled slightly, and he staggered back several steps, nearly falling to the ground. The guard steadied himself, and blood trickled down the corner of his mouth. He looked at Nyetian in shock. Originally, he had thought that, with his strength, he would be able to completely suppress Nyetian with his sword momentum. However, who would have thought that Nyetian's sword momentum would directly force him back and even injure him? Nyetian retracted his aura, and his lips curled into a faint smile. He said, "Do I have the right to go to Evil Wind Island now?" The guard's face stiffened. Although he was unwilling, he still nodded and said, "Sir, please come in." Nyetianling laughed and strode into the city lord's mansion. This was how the world was. Only strength had the right to speak. Without strength, even a lowly guard would humiliate you. The guard looked at the backs of Nyetian and the others, and his nervous expression turned into one of doubt. He murmured, "I clearly sensed that the silver-haired swordsman was only a late paramount god. Why did he become a late overgod when he released his sword aura? Did he hide his strength on purpose?" The guard was still shocked by what he had just seen, and he couldn't believe that he had failed. Yes, he must have hidden his strength. A while later, the guard nodded heavily. Then he said, "Even if this kid is a late overgod, he's definitely a monstrous genius for being able to injure me with his sword." Thinking of this, the guard's forehead was covered in cold sweat, and his face was pale. After entering the city lord's mansion, Nyetian was led by a servant to a public square in the mansion. So many people? Nyetian looked at the square from afar. There were hundreds of people waiting there. He smiled bitterly and thought, "It seems that not everyone can go to Evil Wind Island." Everyone. At this moment, the servant beside Nyetian smiled and said, "The people you see are all people who want to go to Evil Wind Island. However, only 100 people are allowed to enter Evil Wind Island at a time, so you will have to compete with them for the quota." Nyetian was speechless. He had never thought that it would be so complicated to enter Evil Wind Island. If he had known earlier, he would have gone to Evil Wind Island directly. The killing formations were nothing with Fat Cat here anyway. However, since he was already here, there was no point in regretting. He could only follow the rules of the divine martial sword pagoda. "Thank you for leading the way." Nyetian smiled at the servant and walked into the square. Nyetian and the others arrived at where the crowd gathered. There was a huge platform in the middle of the crowd, and a guard of the city lord's mansion stood on it. The crowd looked at the guard, clearly waiting for something. Nyetian was not in a hurry. He was already here, so there was no point in being anxious. A while later, another few dozen swordsmen arrived. Nyetian looked around. There were about 400 to 500 swordsmen here, but only 100 people were allowed to enter Evil Wind Island. In other words, 80% of the people here were not qualified to enter Evil Wind Island. Nyetian used his divine sense to sense that most of the swordsmen here were at the overgod level, and their sword principles were below the essence of sword. Only a few people were at the overgod level, and their sword principles were at the selfless realm. There were 6 sword principles in the immortal state. There were very few swordsmen who could reach the unity of sword and martial. There were probably less than 100 people in the entire 9 realms. Nie Tian knew that Ghost Martial Wild Sand was at the unity of sword and martial, but he didn't know what level the latter was at. The unity of sword and martial was usually divided into 4 minor realms: elementary, intermediate, advanced, and peak. Nie Tian also knew that above the pinnacle of the unity of sword and martial arts, there was a legendary realm of unity of sword and martial arts. Sakura was precisely at the legendary realm of unity of sword and martial art. Nie Tian estimated that Ghost Martial Wild Sand should be at the intermediate or advanced unity of sword and martial. He could feel from Ghost Martial Wild Sand's sword intent that it was far weaker than Sakura's, and it didn't have the freedom of Sakura's sword intent. Nie Tian guessed right. Ghost Martial Wild Sand was at the advanced unity of sword and martial, and he was only 1 step away from the peak. However, when the sword principles reached the later stages, the gap between each minor realm was as obvious as the martial principles, and it was difficult to surpass. Many genius swordsmen couldn't break through to the peak unity of sword and martial. At this time, the guard on the high platform suddenly stepped forward, waved his hands, and signaled for everyone to be quiet. Then he said in a clear voice, "Welcome to Little Divine Martial City. Since you are here, you must want to enter Evil Wind Island. However, not everyone can enter Evil Wind Island. If you want to enter, you will have to rely on your own ability." As he spoke, the guard flipped his palm, took out a token, and said, "This token in my hand is the proof to enter Evil Wind Island. In a while, there will be 100 tokens in the sky. Everyone will have to rely on their own ability to get the token, and you will be qualified to enter Evil Wind Island. Hurry up, I can't wait anymore." Just as the guard finished speaking, someone couldn't wait any longer and shouted loudly. That guard wasn't angry, but smiled faintly, and then nodded to indicate. Then, several black-clothed swordsmen appeared, jumped directly into the sky, and fixed the token in the air. Nie Tian looked at it and couldn't help but smile. This method wasn't bad. It was simple, but it was a little rough. He estimated that there would be a fight for the token. "Lord Ghost Martial, you guys wait at the side, I will go get the token." Nie Tian thought for a moment, and said to Ghost Martial Wild Sand and the others. Ghost Martial Wild Sand's identity was obviously not suitable to snatch the token, and Jian Jingyun and Ghost Martial Can still had blood traces in their bodies. In addition, they were just injured by Liang Chao, so it was not suitable for them to take action. The 4 identity medallions were now in Nie Tian's hands. "Nie Tian, be careful of the black-clothed cultivators over there." Ghost Martial Wild Sand nodded his head, and then looked at a black-clothed cultivator in the distance. He transmitted his voice to Nie Tian. "This person seems to know you. He has been watching you for a long time." Nie Tian was slightly stunned. His face didn't change, but he used his spiritual sense to secretly sense that person. He hadn't been paying attention earlier, so he didn't realize that someone was watching him. "It's him." Nie Tian's spiritual sense moved, and indeed, he felt a familiar aura. His expression changed slightly, and he shouted a name in his heart, "Thousand Feathers Dark Crow." Thousand Feathers Dark Crow. Nie Tian naturally knew this person. However, this person had disappeared for a long time, and Nie Tian hadn't seen him for a long time. Back then, during the grand competition of the 12 Shrine, when Nie Tian wanted to kill Luo Xian, a person suddenly appeared. Not only did this person save Luo Xian, he even forced Nie Tian to kneel, and even nearly killed Nie Tian. Chapter 1896. The Thousand-Feathered Dark Raven. Nie Tian's face darkened as soon as he recognized the enemy's identity. Unconcealable killing intent surged in his eyes. Nie Tian would never forget what the Thousand-Feathered Dark Raven had done to him. Nie Tian wasn't a petty person, but there were some grudges that had to be avenged. The Dark Raven obviously knew of Nie Tian's existence. Therefore, he had been keeping an eye on Nie Tian from the shadows. After Nie Tian confirmed the Dark Raven's identity, he turned around and locked his cold eyes on the latter. The dark raven suddenly sensed the killing intent emanating from Nietian. His eyes couldn't help but quiver. He felt as though he was a sheep being targeted by a wolf. His heart shuddered. How did this kid become so strong? The dark raven creased his brows and thought to himself, I'm an early-stage paramount god expert. Why do I feel so scared when he looks at me? The dark raven remembered that when he first met Nietian in the grand competition of the 12 shrines, the latter was only a low god. But now, in less than 2 years, Nietian's strength had reached late-stage high god. This was too terrifying. In less than 2 years, Nietian's strength had increased by 2 major realms. The dark raven was astounded by the terrifying speed of advancement. But what shocked him even more was that Nietian's eyes were as cold as ice. The dark raven couldn't understand why a mighty paramount god expert like him would be afraid of a high god. Long time no see, thousand-feathered dark raven. Nietian's voice sounded at this moment. It was transmitted directly to the dark raven. His voice was calm, but it carried a bone-chilling coldness. Back when the dark raven forced Nietian to kneel, Nietian swore that if he survived, he would return the humiliation he suffered today 100-fold. Now that he had encountered the dark crow again, Nietian was naturally furious and wanted revenge. Stinking brat, I didn't expect to meet you here. Looks like you've grown very quickly recently, Crow replied with a sinister smile. Although he felt threatened by Nietian, he still did not view Nietian as a true opponent. He felt that a high god wasn't worthy of being the raven's opponent. Moreover, the Crow clan was determined to kill Nietian. Nietian's rate of growth was simply too frightening. This caused Crow to feel uneasy. He had a faint premonition that if he didn't kill Nietian now, he wouldn't have another chance in the future. If Nietian grew up, he would definitely be an extremely terrifying opponent. Crow, you will soon see how powerful I am now. Nietian smiled coldly, his eyes filled with killing intent. Stinking brat, this seat will be waiting. Crow coldly laughed, his killing intent similarly surging. Nietian's lips curled into a cold smile. When the time came to snatch the command medallion, he would make a move against Crow. Nietian, do you know this person? At this moment, Guiwu Kwangsha sensed that Nietian's emotions were somewhat abnormal. He couldn't help but ask. This person is from the 1,000-feather pavilion, and I have some grudges with him. I almost died in his hands. Nietian lightly nodded as he replied. Guiwu Kwangsha froze. Nietian, you have to be careful. This person isn't alone. There are several other experts hidden in the shadows. And them? Nietian's eyes narrowed, after which, he activated his holographic divine inscriptions, enveloping Crow. As expected, he discovered that there were several other figures hidden in the air. Not only that, each of them had an aura that was no weaker than Crow. Earlier, Nietian had been too focused on Crow and hadn't sensed the existence of others. Not only that, everyone here was a swordsman, and their sword intent was extremely dense. This had also interfered with Nietian's perception. Guiwu Kwangsha was indeed worthy of being a sword marshal as one realm expert. Not a single sword intent fluctuation could escape his perception. This is bad. Nietian's gaze was heavy as he stared at the several figures hidden in the shadows. If there was only Crow, Nietian had full confidence that he could kill him. But with the addition of several experts hidden in the shadows, things would be a little difficult. In fact, Nietian could let Guiwu Kwangsha or Di Shirtian act at this moment. But he didn't wish to do so. He wanted to kill Crow with his own hands. Only then would he be able to dispel the hatred in his heart. Everyone, let the fight for the command medallion begin. At this moment, the guard on the high platform opened his mouth and announced in a loud voice. In an instant, the entire crowd exploded. Everyone's gazes were fixed on the command medallion high up in the sky. Everyone get out of the way. This daddy wants to be the first to obtain the command medallion. A martial artist roared in rage. His silhouette directly soared up into the sky, flying towards the sky. The other martial artists also scrambled to be the first to rush up into the sky, fighting for the command medallion. However, Nie Tian wasn't in a hurry. His pair of eyes stared fixedly at Crow. Similarly, Dark Knight was also looking at Nie Tian. It seemed that he was somewhat afraid of the latter and didn't make a move. At this time, many tyrannical martial artists with tyrannical strength had already obtained the command medallion. Nie Tian raised his head and looked at the sky. There weren't many command medallions left in the sky. There were only a few dozen left. Nie Tian glanced at Crow. His silhouette immediately moved and rushed up into the sky. He had to obtain 4 command medallions. Therefore, he had to act as soon as possible. He couldn't afford to be in a deadlock with Crow. Nie Tian's silhouette soared up into the sky. He aimed at a command medallion and directly flew over. That command medallion is this daddy's. However, at this moment, a furious roar resounded. A figure madly rushed over and directly slapped a palm towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian didn't retaliate. Instead, his silhouette moved and dodged the opponent's attack. He stretched out his hand and directly grabbed the command medallion. God damn it! The person immediately became furious when he saw that Nie Tian had obtained the command medallion. Killing intent flooded his face as he said sinisterly, "Damned brat, you're just a piece of trash who's only a higher god. You're looking to die." With that, the person launched another palm strike. A sharp palm whistled through the air, crushing towards Nie Tian. He actually wanted to kill Nie Tian. Nie Tian's face sank slightly. The person was a mid-overgod. He had used his full strength in that palm strike. If Nie Tian was just a regular late overgod, he probably would have been slain on the spot. He was only trying to steal the command medallion, yet the person directly tried to kill him. He was vicious. The starlight heavenly slash appeared in Nie Tian's hand. He directly stabbed out, and the sword shot through the palm strike like a dragon. Arg! In the next moment, the person howled out miserably and was blown away. Even without using the 3 forbidden techniques, Nie Tian was more than enough to deal with a mid-overgod like that. Crow's eyes could not help but sink when he saw this from below. His surprise was all displayed on his face. Nie Tian was only a late overgod, yet he was actually able to send a mid-overgod flying with a single strike. His battle prowess had exceeded his expectations. This brat must die today. At that moment, Crow's killing intent became even more certain. He could see extremely terrifying talent from Nie Tian. He could not let Nie Tian continue to grow. Chapter 1897. Hovering in midair, Nie Tian paid close attention to the raven's every move. He could not help but shudder when he saw Crow charge over. He was already prepared for battle. However, to his surprise, Crow did not attack him. Instead, he went for the medallion. Nie Tian frowned. He did not attack either. Instead, he charged towards another medallion. Before using the 3 forbidden techniques, Nie Tian was one of the weaker ones. However, he was very fast. In the blink of an eye, he had already obtained the other 3 medallions. A faint smile appeared at the corner of Nie Tian's mouth as he put the 4 identity medallions into his ring. 4 identity medallions are enough. However, he suddenly discovered that several cold gazes had already locked onto him. 100 medallions were not enough in the first place. Nie Tian had obtained 4 medallions, and he was only a late high god. He was a pushover no matter how one looked at him, so it was very easy for the other swordsmen to target him. This kid has 4 medallions on him. Let's kill him and take the medallions, roared one of the swordsmen as he pointed at Nie Tian. He was the first to attack. A sword appeared in his hand, and he directly stabbed at Nie Tian. Nie Tian frowned slightly. The person who had suddenly attacked was a mid-overgod. His laws of the sword had reached the essence of the sword, so he was quite strong. Looks like I need to teach these people a lesson, or they'll definitely keep coming, thought Nyetian. Afterwards, he activated the dragon's inscription talisman and unleashed the power of the inscriptions. His presence suddenly skyrocketed, and his strength rose to peak high god. If Nyetian did not retaliate forcefully, there would only be more and more people who wanted to take the medallions. As a result, he decided to deter the others so that they would no longer covet the medallions. However, Nyetian did not use his full strength. Instead, he only used the dragon's inscription talisman. He knew that Crow had always been paying attention to him. He did not want Crow to see his true battle prowess. Activating the dragon's inscription talisman and raising his strength to peak high god was more than enough to deal with the swordsman before him. What happened? That swordsman suddenly sensed that Nyetian had grown stronger. He couldn't help being startled, a trace of shock appearing on his face. God-piercing sword. Nyetian smiled faintly, and with a low shout, he stabbed out with his sword. The surrounding space suddenly tightened, and a mighty sword shadow crazily pressed over. Rumble! Bang! The two sword shadows clashed and a muffled sound rang out. A figure was sent flying, leaving a trail of blood in the air. How is this possible? When the others saw this scene, their eyes trembled and they subconsciously retreated. They had never thought that Nyetian would actually be so terrifying, where he could heavily injure a mid-over god with a single strike. If you don't want to die, then scram. Nyetian's gaze swept past those few swordsmen, and he sneered with dense killing intent. He had already shown mercy with that sword strike just now. Otherwise, that swordsman would have long since turned to ashes, and not even his divine spark would have been left behind. The other swordsmen were stunned, and they could not help but retreat. They no longer dared to approach Nyetian. Nyetian sneered coldly. Then, he turned his gaze to the raven, pondering whether he should attack and kill the raven now. After all, this was the city lord's estate of miniature divine martial city. It would be rather inappropriate for Nyetian to kill someone. Moreover, Crow seemed to want to go to Evil Wind Island as well, so Nyetian did not need to strike out right now. Brat, is this your trump card? At this moment Crow sneered. He stared at Nyetian with a sunken gaze, and he did not hide his killing intent at all. The reason why he had not struck out yet was because he was worried that Nyetian had a powerful trump card. When he saw Nyetian's dragon cloak, he relaxed a lot. He admitted that Nyetian's strength was indeed far superior to other cultivators of the same level. However, compared to Crow, Nyetian's battle prowess was like the difference between heaven and earth. Crow believed that this was the best opportunity for him to kill Nyetian. With this thought in mind, Crow's figure moved, stepping on the air and flying towards Nyetian. I didn't want to kill you, but you want to kill me. Nyetian's eyes narrowed and he sneered inwardly, looks like I must kill someone this time. Below, Guiwu Kwangsha's expression changed when he saw Crow suddenly approaching Nyetian. He became slightly nervous and prepared to attack. The person he was worried about was not Crow, but the Thousand Feather Pavilion's experts hiding in the void. Guiwu Kwangsha had seen Nyetian in action before. He believed that with Nyetian's current battle prowess, killing Crow was a piece of cake. Smelly brat, your strength has amazed me. Unfortunately, this is as far as you can go. Crow's figure was only a few hundred meters away from Nyetian. His pair of cold eyes were like a hawk's, locked onto Nyetian. Since you want to kill me, let's settle this once and for all. Nyetianling laughed. He took a step forward and flew higher. He only wanted to kill Crow, he didn't want to hurt the innocent. Courting death. Crow's brows furrowed and his figure moved as well. He arrived in the sky, facing off against Nyetian. The others were stunned. Countless gazes looked up at the sky, wondering what was going on. Are these two going to fight? It looks like a battle of life and death. However, the difference in strength between the two is too great. One is a high god, the other is a supreme god. Isn't that silver-haired brat courting death? Yeah, the difference between a high god and a supreme god is too exaggerated. Unless that silver-haired brat has reached the realm of sword and martial arts as one, he will definitely be killed in one move. The crowd of swordsmen discussed among themselves. They even temporarily forgot about fighting over the tokens. Brat, you only have one chance to attack. You better make good use of it. Crow smiled cold. Immediately, he released his aura. Boundless black mist appeared, pervading the air. Upon closer inspection, one would see that the mist was actually made up of black feathers. 1,000 feathers, Crow, you only have one chance to attack as well. You better make good use of it. Nietion's face was as calm as still water. Sword aura surged around his body. His entire being was like a sharp sword, ready to attack at any moment. Arrogant, the raven sneered coldly. Immediately after, its body trembled, and the black feathers on its body condensed into a pair of gigantic black wings. When the wings unfurled, they spanned over 10,000 meters, like a black curtain, causing the entire sky to darken. Die. A venomous voice came from Crow's throat. Suddenly, the enormous black wings trembled and turned into 2 enormous black blades, pressing down on Nietion. It's over. That silver-haired brat is dead for sure. Seeing this scene, the crowd's eyes trembled. However, Nietion stood tall in the sky, not the slightest bit of fear on his face. His eyes were filled with killing intent and an intense desire to fight. In the next moment, countless black runes surged out of Nietion's body. His aura skyrocketed. At the same time, scalding blood chi also surged out. Chapter 1898. Boom, boom, boom. High up in the sky, Nietion's energy surged like the sea. His sword will surged, and his blood energy surged. He was like a volcano, ready to erupt at any moment. Crow's brows furrowed involuntarily as he sensed Nietion's aura. His face was filled with shock as an ominous feeling rose in his heart. But he'd already made his move, and if he pulled back now, he'd be courting death. How is this possible? The others couldn't help but tremble when they sensed Nietion's energy. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. 1,000-feathered raven, it's time for you to pay with your blood. Nietion's eyes were bloodshot as he roared madly, as if he could see himself being drenched in blood under the pressure of the raven's aura. It was time for him, Nietion, to get his revenge. As his raging voice echoed out, the sword intent around Nietion, stimulated by his blood chi, surged to the limit. Then, in an instant, an awe-inspiring sword shadow that was 10,000 meters long appeared in the air. With a loud rumble, a huge sword light appeared between heaven and earth, like a dazzling waterfall of light pouring down in torrents. The crowd's eyes suddenly froze, and their expressions became dull. Never in their wildest dreams could they have imagined that Nietion could unleash such terrifying power. Boom! Bam! Bam! The huge sword shadow fell down like a mountain and landed directly on the 2 black giant blades, causing 2 loud noises in the air. Under everyone's watchful eyes, the 2 black sabers shattered. No! Raven was so shocked by what he saw that his eyes widened, and he let out a miserable howl. Unfortunately, it was too late. The sword projection continued to descend, smashing into Raven. In the blink of an eye, Raven was engulfed by the sword projection, and he died on the spot. Raven, an elder of the 1,000 Feathers Pavilion, a paramount god, had been killed by a single sword strike from Nietion. Dead silence filled the area. Countless gazes were fixed on Nietion, and everyone's faces were stiff and lifeless. Before Nietion and Raven exchanged blows, everyone had assumed that Raven would kill Nietion in a single move. But the result was the opposite. Raven had been killed by Nietion with a single sword strike. Not even in his wildest dreams could Dark Knight have imagined that a paramount god like him would be killed by Nietion with a single sword strike. After killing Raven, Nietion stood tall in the sky, his long robe fluttering in the wind. He looked like a sword god descending to the mortal world, proud and aloof. At this moment Guiwu Guangsha was also stunned. He knew that Nie Tian could win, but he hadn't expected it to be so easy. Guiwu Guangsha finally realized how monstrous Nie Tian was. In his heart, Nie Tian's demon level had risen by yet another level. Nie Tian retracted his aura and was preparing to descend to the ground. But at this moment, he suddenly sensed movement in the air. Following which, several chilling killing auras appeared, rushing towards him. "It's those people in ambush," Nie Tian exclaimed in his heart. He immediately reacted, and his aura skyrocketed once more. Astral soul wings appeared on his back, and his silhouette flickered as he tried to evade the attack of those people. "Smelly brat, leave your life behind." In the air, a low voice filled with killing intent rang out, after which, a terrifying gigantic hand appeared, blotting out the sky and covering the earth as it grabbed towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian instantly felt the space around him constricting. An immense pressure bore down on him, causing him to be unable to move. "Damn it!" Nie Tian's countenance changed as he screamed in his heart. The person who attacked was actually able to confine the space around him. This caught him unprepared. Boom! Boom! In that moment, two terrifying fist projections appeared in the air, like wild beasts charging towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian could sense that the person who attacked was at least a mid-paramount god. If those two fist projections hit him, he would die beyond the shadow of a doubt. Right now, Nie Tian's battle prowess was only at the level of an ordinary mid-paramount god. But when facing three mid-paramount gods, he had no way of fighting back. Who dares to hurt him? In that moment of life or death, a domineering voice rang out, and a beam of sword intent shot up into the sky, heading straight for Nie Tian. "Exalted Guiwu," Nie Tian said, eyes flashing as he saw a figure flying in his direction. It was none other than Guiwu Guangsha. Guiwu Guangsha. Rumbling sounds could be heard as the sword intent spread out. The sealed space returned to normal, and the sword intent transformed into a shield that wrapped around Nie Tian. Bang! Bang! In the next moment, the two fist shadows in the air bombarded Nie Tian's sword intent shield. However, they directly shattered and didn't cause any harm to Nie Tian. The sudden turn of events happened in an instant, and everyone was still unable to react. "Nie Tian, are you alright?" Guiwu Guangsha asked as he arrived at Nie Tian's side. "I'm fine. Many thanks for your help, exalted Guiwu." Nie Tian let out a long breath of impure air and smiled faintly. Since Guiwu Guangsha had made a move, then there was no need to fear these people from Thousand Feathers Pavilion. "A bunch of rascals, get out here!" Guiwu Guangsha was relieved after confirming that Nie Tian wasn't injured. He roared, his voice like thunder, resounding in the air, turning into powerful sound waves that surged endlessly. In the next moment, three black-clothed martial artists appeared in the air. All of them wore black robes that covered their faces, making it impossible to see their faces. Nie Tian's divine sense swept over, and he couldn't help but be startled. The strength of these three black-clothed martial artists was much stronger than he had imagined. Two of them had the strength of a mid-stage paramount god, while the other one had the strength of a late-stage paramount god. Nie Tian guessed that the person who had sealed the spacetime was that late-stage paramount god. "Guiwu Mo Lu, are you from the Guiwu clan?" The eyes of the leader of the black-clothed martial artists trembled, but he was still able to maintain his calm. A pair of cold eyes stared at Guiwu Guangsha as he spoke in a deep voice. "You have some knowledge." Guiwu Guangsha sneered, his face full of contempt, and said in a cold voice, "Who are you?" The strength of these three people was indeed very strong, but in front of Guiwu Guangsha, they seemed very weak. At this moment, everyone's eyes were on Guiwu Guangsha. They didn't expect that this unremarkable swordsman was actually from the Guiwu clan, and that his strength was tyrannical. This old man is Qinyu Jiaofeng. The black-clothed martial artist spoke in a deep voice, appearing neither servile nor overbearing. Qinyu Jiaofeng. When Guiwu Kuangsha heard this name, he couldn't help but laugh and said, "So you are one of the 5 great supremacies of the Thousand Feathers Pavilion, no wonder your strength is so strong." And when Jiaofeng heard Guiwu Kuangsha mention the 5 great supremacies of the Thousand Feathers Pavilion, his eyes couldn't help but tremble. He clearly didn't expect that Guiwu Kuangsha actually knew of the 5 great supremacies of the Thousand Feathers Pavilion. The 5 great supremacies of the Thousand Feathers Pavilion. This title was only known by the people of the Thousand Feathers Pavilion, outsiders basically didn't know. Jiaofeng felt very strange. How did Guiwu Kuangsha know of the 5 great supremacies of the Thousand Feathers Pavilion, and as soon as he heard his name, he immediately guessed his identity. "Who are you?" Jiaofeng's eyes darkened and he asked in a cold voice. "Guiwu Kuangsha." Guiwu Kuangsha said his name in a cold voice. Chapter 1899. Guiwu Kuangsha. He is Lord Guiwu Kuangsha. After a moment of silence, exclamations rang out all around. Countless gazes were staring at Guiwu Kuangsha, their eyes revealing reverence and passion. Guiwu Kuangsha was not considered a peak expert in the entire 9 domains, but he was extremely famous in the sword world. Moreover, he was a famous swordsman hundreds of thousands of years ago. He rarely appeared in front of the public, so his appearance naturally caused quite a stir. Moreover, the majority of the people here were swordsmen, so the name of Guiwu Kuangsha could be said to resound like thunder in their ears. The appearance of such a legendary figure in the sword world made these swordsmen extremely fanatical. So it is Southern Guiwu, no wonder he is so strong. Jiao Feng was stunned for a moment, then he said in a deep voice, "Lord Southern Guiwu, what is your relationship with this silver-haired boy? Why did you save him?" Jiao Feng was puzzled why Guiwu Kuangsha knew about the 5 supremacies of the Thousand Feather Building, but he did not say it, instead focusing on Ye Tian. "He is my friend," Guiwu Kuangsha replied coldly. In addition to cold disdain in his eyes, there was also a great killing intent. He said in a deep voice, "Since I have already made a move, today all of you will die." Guiwu Kuangsha already knew about the existence of Jiao Feng and the others, but he did not make a move. Now that Jiao Feng and the others wanted to kill Nye Tian, Guiwu Kuangsha had no choice but to make a move. Therefore, Guiwu Kuangsha decided to go all out and kill Jiao Feng and the others. Jiao Feng suddenly felt the killing intent from Guiwu Kuangsha. His eyes could not help but tremble, and his body subconsciously took a step back. He knew that with Guiwu Kuangsha's strength, it was as easy as flipping his hand to kill them. "Lord Guiwu, since you know that this old man is one of the 5 supremacies of the Thousand Feather Building, then you should also know my position in the Thousand Feather Building. If you kill this old man, the Thousand Feather Building will absolutely not let it go." Jiao Feng calmed down and said in a deep voice, "Humph." Guiwu Kuangsha sneered and said, "Lord Jiao, are you threatening me?" "I don't dare to threaten you." Jiao Feng slightly nodded and said, "Lord Guiwu's strength is tyrannical, so he's naturally not afraid of the Thousand Feather Pavilion's revenge. However, I'm afraid that the Guiwu clan wouldn't be willing to provoke an enemy like the Thousand Feather Pavilion." Guiwu Kuangsha's gaze abruptly sank, while his face instantly turned cold. Jiao Feng's meaning was very clear. He was using the Guiwu family to threaten the Guiwu Wild Sand. Guiwu Kuangsha was naturally not afraid of the Thousand Feather Building. Even if the master of the Thousand Feather Building appeared, even if he was no match for him, he still had the ability to protect himself. However, the Guiwu clan was different. They had many clansmen, and many of their branches were very weak. If they were targeted by Qinyu Tower, it would be very troublesome. Yu Feng Guang. But Kuang Yu v Kuang Guang Yuan said, "Guang, Kuangsha, Wu Kuang Fuyu, of Guang." Ghost Marshal Quang Sha suddenly raised his head, before coldly saying, "If those words had come from the mouth of Wind Flame Qianyu, I might have considered it a little. But you want to scare me off with those words coming from the mouth of a mere High Lord? Dream on." What he was shocked about was not the attitude of the Ghost Marshal Wild Sand, but the fact that the latter had actually called out the name of the master of the Thousand Feather Pavilion. Windfire Thousand Feathers was precisely the name of Thousand Feather Tower Master. Very few people in the 9 major domains knew this name. Even in the Thousand Feathers Tower, only a few people knew this name. Jiao Feng had never imagined that Ghost Marshal Wild Sand would actually be able to say the name Wind Flame Thousand Feathers. "You, who exactly are you? How do you know so much?" Jiao Feng panicked momentarily, his voice trembling. "Do I still need to explain to a dead person?" Taking a step forward, Gui Wu Quang Sha released sword intent from his entire body. Appearing just like a gigantic sword intent radiated out, causing everyone below to feel a frightening pressure, causing them to feel as though they were suffocating. "Gui Wu Quang Sha, you really want to kill me?" Jiao Feng felt the pressure coming at him. His eyes violently trembled as he cried out in alarm. Gui Wu Quang Sha did not say anything, as sword intent started to surge out from his entire body, before gradually condensing in the air. What a terrifying sword aura! Everyone dodged in succession, and their expressions were filled with extreme shock. They were astounded by the strength of the person who had fused the sword and martial arts into one. "Lord High Lord, leave now. Let's block him." At this time, the 2 people beside Jiao Feng shouted, and directly rushed over. They simultaneously attacked, and 2 fist shadows attacked towards Gui Wu Quang Sha. "Do you think you can block me with just the 2 of you?" Gui Wu Quang Sha roared, and his entire body's sword intent descended with a loud rumble. An incomparably gigantic sword shadow appeared, causing the world to tremble and the space to sway. Bang! Bang! With 2 muffled sounds, the 2 fist shadows in the air directly collapsed, and the 2 black-clothed martial artists were directly submerged by the sword shadows. 2 Supreme God middle stage martial artists died tragically in an instant. Jiao Feng's eyes trembled, and he wanted to resist, but he discovered that his strength was simply unable to contend against Gui Wu Quang Sha. "Lord Gui Wu, stay your hand." At the moment of life and death, a vigorous voice suddenly resounded, and then a gigantic hand appeared in the void, forcibly blocking Gui Wu Quang Sha's fatal sword strike. Rumble! In the void, a rumbling sound resounded. The sword shadow and the gigantic hand collided, and both collapsed at the same time, turning into billowing waves that pervaded the space. Everyone felt a frightening and violent force attack, and retreated once again. Rumble! The terrifying force spread to the ground, and the entire square shook violently, directly collapsing, and the earth on the ground soared into the sky. Seeing this scene, Nie Tian's heart shook. This was the strength of a peak supreme god martial artist. It was truly frightening. After a moment, the billowing waves in the sky gradually dissipated, and 2 figures appeared. One was Gui Wu Quang Sha, and the other was a middle-aged man in white, but Qianyu Jiao Feng was nowhere to be seen. It was obvious that the white-clothed man had blocked the fatal blow for Jiao Feng, and the latter had seized the opportunity to escape. Everyone looked at the white-clothed man. This person was able to block Gui Wu Quang Sha's sword, and his strength was also quite valiant. Nie Tian's divine sense swept over the white-clothed man, and the latter actually had the strength of a peak supreme god. No wonder he could block Gui Wu Quang Sha's sword. Lord Gui Wu's strength is really valiant. You haven't even used your sword, but you already made me feel so much pressure. The white-clothed man looked at Gui Wu Quang Sha, and the corner of his mouth rose into a faint smile, but his expression was unexpectedly calm. He was right, Gui Wu Quang Sha really hadn't used his full strength in that sword strike, and he hadn't even used his sword. Otherwise, he might not have been able to block that sword strike. Gui Wu Kuangsha's eyes slightly sank. He hadn't expected that this white-clothed man would suddenly appear, and he asked in a cold voice, "Who are you?" "This junior is the city lord of Minor Divine Martial City, Qi Qing." The white-clothed man faintly smiled and introduced himself. City Lord. When everyone heard Qi Qing's words, their eyes couldn't help but tremble, and their expressions became strange. Who would have thought that the City Lord of Minor Divine Martial City would appear at this time, and even save the people of Qianyu Tower? Chapter 1900. Nie Tian frowned and sized up Qi Qing. He didn't expect Qi Qing to be the City Lord of Minor Divine Martial City. Qi Qing was the City Lord of Minor Divine Martial City, so he should be from the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda. Why would he save the supremacy of Thousand Feather Tower? What was more interesting was that Qi Qing didn't use a sword but some other martial skill. He was from the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda, so he should be a swordsman. However, the strength he revealed at this moment was the strength of martial arts, which was strange. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he thought to himself, could it be that this Qi Qing guy is hiding his strength? Qi Qing didn't show his sword's strength, as if he was intentionally hiding it. "You are the City Lord of Minor Divine Martial City?" Gui Wu Kuangsha's eyes darkened. His aura dissipated by more than half, but he still maintained his vigilance. "Yes." Qi Qing nodded and bowed respectfully. "I didn't know Lord Guiwu was coming. Please forgive me for not going out to greet you." Qi Qing was indeed a junior in front of Guiwu Kuangsha. His current actions weren't inappropriate, but the more he acted like this, the more puzzled Nie Tian was. "City Lord Qi, you just welcomed me." Guiwu Kuangsha responded coldly. "But the way you welcomed me made me unhappy." "You must be joking." Qi Qing smiled. Of course, he knew that Guiwu Kuangsha was talking about him saving Jiao Feng. "I don't have time to joke with you." Guiwu Kuangsha's face was gloomy. He asked directly, "Why did you save someone from Thousand Feather Tower?" Thousand Feather Tower was famous in the 9 domains, but it wasn't a good one. It was an organization like the Inescapable Net and Reverse Scale. Qi Qing was stunned. "So that person is from Thousand Feather Tower. It seems that I acted rashly. I thought that person came to Minor Divine Martial City as a guest. Since everyone is a guest, I, as the host, can't watch you fight to the death. I didn't expect that person to be from Thousand Feather Tower. I'm really sorry. This matter is indeed this junior's fault, and I hope that Senior Gui Wu can be magnanimous enough to forgive me." Gui Wu Kuangsha's face tensed up. He wasn't a 3-year-old kid, so how could he not see that Qi Qing was just brushing him off? If it was said that Qi Qing did not know Jiao Feng's identity, even a ghost would not believe it. Who would risk their lives to save someone they didn't know at all? However, Qi Qing was a very cunning person. He addressed Qi Qing as Senior and Lord, appearing to be very respectful. This caused the ghost Martial Wild Sand to be unable to get angry. Even if Guiwu Kuangsha knew that Qi Qing was lying, there was nothing he could do about it. After all, Qi Qing was from the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Since he was able to become the city lord of a small Shenwu city, his status in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda was definitely not low. The little godly martial city was a line of defense for Evil Wind Island. Anyone who wanted to enter Evil Wind Island had to pass through the little godly martial city first. Nie Tian watched from the side. He deeply felt that Qi Qing was cunning and insidious. On the surface, he spoke beautifully, but in fact, he was hiding something. "City Lord Qi, this matter ends here." The ghost Martial Wild Sand did not want to be entangled with Qi Qing any longer. He said cold and turned to leave. "Senior Guiwu, since you have come to the little godly martial city, you must want to enter Evil Wind Island. Why don't I personally accompany you to Evil Wind Island?" Qi Qing said loudly with a sly smile. "There is no need. I will enter Evil Wind Island with the others, The ghost Marshal Wild Sand responded cold and moved to Nie Tian's side. Qi Qing smiled faintly and didn't say anything. However, when his gaze swept over Nie Tian, a trace of imperceptible coldness appeared in his eyes. At this moment, Qi Qing looked at the crowd and said loudly, "Everyone, please gather at the City Lord's mansion tomorrow. There will be a guide to lead everyone to Evil Wind Island." After saying that, Qi Qing looked at Guiwu Quangsha again and bowed. "Senior Guiwu, you can only enter Evil Wind Island tomorrow. Why don't you stay at the City Lord's mansion for the night?" "There is no need." The ghost Marshal Wild Sand rejected Qi Qing cold. "Lord Guiwu." But at this moment, Nie Tian suddenly spoke. He looked at Qi Qing with a smile and said, "Since the City Lord has invited us, how can we waste his kindness? Why don't you stay at the City Lord's mansion for the night?" The ghost Marshal Wild Sand was stunned for a moment. He looked at Nie Tian and nodded. "Thank you, little brother." Qi Qing looked at Nie Tian and smiled faintly, appearing very enthusiastic. Next, Qi Qing personally brought Nie Tian and the others to choose a small courtyard in the City Lord's mansion. "Senior Guiwu, please rest. This junior will take his leave." Qi Qing bowed respectfully and turned to leave. The ghost Marshal Wild Sand looked at Qi Qing's back and waited until the latter had completely disappeared before he said cold, "Hypocrite." Nie Tian curled his lips and said, "Lord Guiwu, I'm afraid this City Lord is not simple." "You can see that too?" The ghost Marshal Wild Sand was stunned for a moment and looked at Nie Tian in surprise. Nie Tian nodded slightly and said, "Let's go to the courtyard and talk." They entered the small courtyard. Nie Tian activated the holographic divine rune and confirmed that there was no one around. But he was still worried and let the fat cat sense again. Only then did he feel at ease. "Nie Tian, are you suspecting Qi Qing?" The ghost Marshal Wild Sand sat down and looked at Nie Tian. "Yes." Nie Tian nodded and said, "Qi Qing is from the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda. There is no reason for him to save someone from the Thousand Feather Tower. Moreover, he did not reveal his sword Dao's strength. It seems that he is deliberately hiding his strength." The ghost Marshal Wild Sand frowned and said, "I also noticed that Qi Qing's sword Dao cultivation is not weak, but he used a special method to hide it. I suspect that he is from the Thousand Feather Tower." "Impossible." The ghost marshal can let out a strange cry and said, "Qi Qing is a city lord. His position in the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda is not low. How can he be from the Thousand Feather Tower?" "Nothing is impossible." Nie Tian smiled and said, "The inescapable net. It is possible for an organization like the Thousand Feather Tower to infiltrate any force." The ghost marshal can took a deep breath and said no more. Just because Qi Qing saved someone from the Thousand Feather Tower, isn't it a bit reckless to say that he is from the Thousand Feather Tower? Jian Jingyun, who had been silent all this time, said cautiously, "I am also just suspecting." Nie Tian smiled. He could not confirm Qi Qing's real identity, but his intuition told him that this person was not simple. At this time, Nie Tian suddenly thought of something. He looked at the ghost Marshal Wild Sand and said, "Lord Ghost Marshal, I heard you mention the 5 supremacies of the Thousand Feather Tower. Who are they?" The ghost Marshal Wild Sand was stunned and looked a bit uncomfortable. He seemed to have thought of something. After a moment of silence, he said, "In the Thousand Feather Tower, there is a Tower Master and a Vice Tower Master. Under the 2 Tower Masters are the 5 supremacies. The Jiao Feng we met before was one of the 5 supremacies." "Oh." Nie Tian nodded and said, "It seems that Jiao Feng's position in the Thousand Feather Tower is very high. Why is he here?" Chapter 1901. Gui Wu Quangsha sighed. His expression was somewhat grave. He couldn't help but stand up and look into the distance. There was an unconcealable worry between his brows. Seeing Gui Wu Quangsha's reaction, Nie Tian couldn't help but frown. "Lord Gui Wu, what are you worried about?" It seemed that Gui Wu Sha had noticed something, but wasn't willing to say it. Furthermore, Nie Tian had some doubts in his heart. It seemed that Gui Wu Sha was very familiar with the Thousand Feathers building. He even knew the name of the Thousand Feathers building master. This was very unusual. However, it seemed that Gui Wu Sha didn't want to say it. Nie Tian didn't continue asking. Teacher, is that Thousand Feathers building very powerful? Gui Wu couldn't sit still at this time. He stood up and asked. Gui Wu Sha didn't speak. After a long time, he sighed and said, "What should come can't be avoided. I appeared here with Exalt Thousand Feather. Perhaps this is my destiny." Nie Tian, Jian Jingyun, and Gui Wu looked at each other with puzzled faces. They didn't know what Gui Wu Sha meant. From the looks of it, it seemed that Gui Wu Sha and the Thousand Feathers building had an unknown past. Sigh. It was all my fault back then. Gui Wu Sha sighed again. He suddenly turned around. His face instantly turned old, as if he had aged hundreds of thousands of years. The expression in his eyes turned dim. "Teacher, what's going on?" Gui Wu asked impulsively with a tangled face. "Gui Wu Master once told you that you are my only disciple." Gui Wu Sha looked at Gui Wu. His eyes were burning, but his expression was somewhat painful. He said in a heavy voice, "Master lied to you about this matter." "What do you mean?" Gui Wu was stunned. His face couldn't help turning stiff. Gui Wu Sha took a deep breath and said, "Gui Wu before you, Master had another disciple. His name is Wind Flame Thousand Feathers." Wind Flame Thousand Feathers. Gui Wu Nie Tian, and Jian Jingyun cried out at the same time when they heard this name. Their faces changed as they cried out, "Thousand Feathers building master." Gui Wu Sha had mentioned the name Wind Flame Thousand Feathers before. It was the name of Master Thousand Feathers. Who would have thought that Master Thousand Feather, Wind Flame Thousand Feather, was actually a disciple of Ghost Martial Wild Sand? Nie Tian and the other two stood rooted to the ground, unable to react for a long time. At this time, Nie Tian finally understood why Gui Wu Sha was so familiar with the Thousand Feathers building. "Teacher, what exactly is going on here?" Gui Wu calmed down slightly, before taking a step forward and asking. Sigh. Gui Wu Sha sighed once again and said, "This matter, I have to start from the time when I participated in the Evil Peak sword meet. Back then, I obtained 3rd place in the Evil Edge sword duel. At the same time, I got to know many other genius swordsmen. One of them was called Wind-Fire Duel. This person is a very talented swordsman. His talent in swordsmanship is definitely in the top 3 among all the people I've met." The gazes of Nie Tian and the others couldn't help but tremble. Gui Wu Sha was a grandmaster of the sword world. Perhaps all the famous swordsmen in the sword world had seen him before. Wind-Fire Duel's talent in swordsmanship was actually in the top 3. However, during the Evil Peak sword duel, Wind-Fire Duel was still very young, not even 1,000 years old. He should be the youngest swordsman in that Evil Peak sword duel. Gui Wu Sha nodded and continued. Wind-Fire Duel eventually obtained 4th place in the Evil Peak sword duel, missing the top 3. In the end, he joined the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda and could only become a Divine Martial Swordsman. Nie Tian nodded. Previously, Gui Wu Sha had said that the top 10 of the Evil Peak sword duel were all qualified to join the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda. The top 3 could directly become a Divine Martial Sword Soul, while the remaining 7 could only become a Divine Martial Sword Edge. In the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda, Sword Edge was a title below Sword Soul, but it was still considered pretty good. Gui Wu Sha nodded and continued. After Wind-Fire Duel joined the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda, he became my subordinate. I got along well with him, and often carried out missions in the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda together. However, one day we carried out a secret mission and fell into the enemy's trap. In order to save me, Wind-Fire Duel finally died. I risked my life to save my life. Before Wind-Fire Duel died, he asked me to take care of his child. After that, I returned to the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda and left. Then, I found Wind-Fire Duel's child, and took him in as my disciple. Thousand Feather Tower Master, Wind-Fire Thousand Feather, is Wind-Fire Duel's child. Guiwu Ken reacted and exclaimed, "Yes." Guiwu Quang Sha nodded and said, "When I found Wind-Fire Thousand Feather, he was only a 6-year-old child, but he worshipped his father. After that, I found out that Wind-Fire Thousand Feathers' talent in Sword Dao was extremely terrifying, even above his father. After that, Wind-Fire Thousand Feathers slowly grew up, but he firmly believed that his father's death was a trap. So, he participated in the Evil Peak Sword Duel and became the Sword Chief that year. He successfully joined the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda and became a heavenly sword spirit. At first, I thought that Wind-Fire Thousand Feather would let go of his obsession and work for the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda. He might even become the Divine Martial Sword Master in the future. However, I never thought that Wind-Fire Thousand Feather would betray the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda and establish the Thousand Feather Tower alone. After that, I met Wind-Fire Thousand Feather a few times. He told me that there was another reason for Wind-Fire Duel's death, and he believed that it was the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda that killed Wind-Fire Duel. He wanted to take revenge on the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda, and I advised him to give up on that idea. Who knew that he would cut off our master-disciple relationship? After that, I never met Wind-Fire Thousand Feather again. After saying that, Guiwu Quang Sha's expression became even more gloomy. After listening to Guiwu Quang Sha's story, Nye Tian and the others didn't look too good. Although Nye Tian hadn't seen Wind-Fire Thousand Feather before, from Guiwu Quang Sha's description, this person was definitely a super genius. Moreover, he was able to establish such a terrifying organization like the Thousand Feather Tower by himself. It was enough to show that this person's ability was outstanding. Nye Tian was silent for a moment, then he suddenly looked at Guiwu Quang Sha and said, "Lord Guiwu, what do you think about Wind-Fire Duel's death?" Guiwu Quang Sha was stunned for a moment, then a trace of hesitation flashed in his eyes. After thinking for a moment, he said, "That year, when Wind-Fire Duel and I carried out the mission, there were indeed many suspicious points. To be honest, I also suspected the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda, but after secretly investigating for a long time, I didn't find any suspicious points, so I gave up on the suspicions in my heart." Nye Tian nodded slightly and said, "It seems that Wind-Fire Thousand Feather must have discovered something, so he believed that the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda killed his father." Nye Tian had only heard the whole story once, but he had a feeling that things weren't as simple as they seemed. Wind-Fire Thousand Feather was a smart person, and he definitely wouldn't become enemies with such a huge organization like the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda for no reason. However, this matter was too long ago, and it didn't have any direct relationship with Nye Tian, so he didn't think too much about it. Chapter 1902. Guiwu Quang Sha frowned and said, "Supreme Lord Thousand Feathers has a high status in the Thousand Feather Tower and never appears easily. Fenghua Thousand Feathers believes that the Shenwu Sword Pagoda killed his father and has always wanted revenge. Therefore, the appearance of Supreme Lord Thousand Feathers means that Fenghua Thousand Feathers is ready to take revenge." This. Looking at the ghost Martial Wild Sand, Nye Tian couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Thousand Feather Tower must have been accumulating power in the dark for so many years. Now that Fenghua Thousand Feathers felt that he was strong enough, he wanted to take revenge on the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. The appearance of Supreme Lord Thousand Feathers in Minor Divine Martial City was the signal for Fenghua Thousand Feathers' revenge. The Shenwu Sword Pagoda and Thousand Feather Tower were the top forces in the 9 realms. If they fought, it would shock the 9 realms. Teacher, according to what you said, my senior brother isn't going to take action against the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, is he? Guiwu Kuangsha said in shock. Guiwu Kuangsha said, according to my understanding of Fenghua Thousand Feathers, he will definitely take action against the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Guiwu Kuangsha was stunned and his face turned pale. He was speechless. Lord Guiwu, it's useless to worry now. We can only wait for things to develop. Nie Tian comforted Guiwu Kuangsha and said helplessly. He originally wanted to borrow the power of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda to save Jian Qinqi, but the sudden appearance of the Thousand Feather Tower made things much more complicated. However, Nie Tian decided to continue with his original plan and think of a way to persuade the 2 sword masters to hold the Evil Edge sword duel in advance. The next day, Nie Tian and the others arrived at the city lord's mansion early in the morning. At this time, there were many people gathered outside the mansion. Everyone came early, afraid to miss the time. After all, they had fought for the right to enter Evil Edge Island. A moment later, an azure-clothed swordsman appeared. He looked middle-aged and was an early-stage paramount god. His sword Dao had reached the realm of selflessness. He could be considered an expert. Everyone, my name is Li Wenqing. I will be your guide. The green-clothed swordsman's gaze swept across the crowd. Without any nonsense, he directly said, everyone, please follow me. After saying that, Li Wenqing's figure moved, directly flying high into the sky, and everyone followed. Li Wenqing appeared to not know that Guiwu Kuangsha was also within the crowd, as he did not even look at Guiwu Kuangsha. However, the other swordsman knew the identity of Ghost Marshal Wild Sand, and automatically pulled away from Nie Tian and the rest. A moment later, everyone arrived above the sea of evil sharpness. Li Wenqing quickly arrived above Evil Wind Island. Everyone, there are many restrictions and killing arrays in this space. Please follow closely, one by one. Don't make any mistakes. Li Wenqing's expression was solemn as he looked at everyone and exhorted. Everyone nodded. This was related to their own lives, so of course they couldn't take it lightly. Nie Tian sensed for a moment, and sure enough, he found that there was a strange power surging in the space. It was extremely hidden, but if he carefully sensed it, it gave off a very frightening feeling. Li Wenqing was obviously extremely familiar with the restrictions and slaughter formations in space, and his figure moved nimbly to quickly pass through the layer upon layer of restrictions and slaughter formations. Phew! We're finally out. Everyone walked out of the slaughter formations and came to a safe area, breathing a sigh of relief. Everyone, you've arrived at Evil Wind Island, and you can enter now. However, the rules on Evil Wind Island are strict, and there are some places that outsiders are not allowed to enter. So, please behave yourself and don't clash with the swordsman of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Li Wenqing glanced at everyone and said faintly with a hint of arrogance in his tone. No one felt that there was anything wrong with it. After all, Li Wenqing was a swordsman of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, and it was okay for him to be a little arrogant. Next, everyone left one after another, dispersing to various places on Evil Wind Island. Nie Tian and the rest were not in a hurry, and they waited for everyone to leave. A moment later, only Nie Tian and the rest, as well as Li Wenqing, were left in the air. What are you guys still standing here for? Li Wenqing frowned and asked cold as he looked at Nie Tian and the rest. Gui Wuchan could not stand Li Wenqing's arrogance. He stepped forward and wanted to say something, but he was stopped by Nie Tian. My lord, we'll take our leave now. Nie Tian smiled faintly at Li Wenqing and signaled for everyone to leave. Nie Tian and the rest landed on Evil Wind Island and stopped outside a valley. What the hell? Aren't they just people from the Shenwu Sword Pagoda? Who are they trying to show off? Gui Wuchan mumbled, seemingly dissatisfied with Li Wenqing's attitude. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, Li Wenqing is not bad. He's just a little arrogant. Gui Wuchan snorted and said no more. Sir Gui Wuchan, How can we meet the master of the Xinwu Sword Pagoda? Nie Tian looked at Gui Wuchan and asked. Let's go to the Xinwu city first. Gui Wuchan looked solemn, obviously still thinking about the 1,000-feather tower. All right. Nie Tian nodded, and followed closely behind the ghost Marshal Wild Sand. This was the first time Nie Tian and the other two came to Evil Wind Island. They were not familiar with everything here, so they had to listen to Gui Wuchan's arrangements. Gui Wuchan sat at the front and looked at the surrounding scenery. His expression changed again and again, as if he was thinking about a long time ago. Along the way, Nie Tian and the rest met many young swordsmen from the Xinwu Sword Pagoda. These people looked at them with unfriendly expressions, even a little disdainful. Perhaps in their eyes, Nie Tian and the rest were country bumpkins who came to Evil Wind Island to gain experience. Nie Tian of course did not care. After experiencing so much, he did not care what others thought of him at all. Soon, Nie Tian and the rest arrived outside a majestic ancient city. This is the Xinwu city. Gui Wuchan smiled faintly and pointed at the majestic ancient city in front of him. Nie Tian smiled faintly. Although the Xinwu city was majestic, it was not big. It was much smaller than the small Xinwu city. It seemed to be only a quarter of the size of the small Xinwu city. However, the Xinwu city was the core of the Xinwu Sword Pagoda, so this place was worthy of the name Xinwu City. Just as Nie Tian was about to enter the city, he suddenly felt a powerful sword aura appear. He could not help but frown and look up into the sky. Where Nie Tian's gaze landed, a figure in gray appeared. He carried a black broadsword on his back and released a powerful sword aura. The sword aura that Nie Tian felt just now was released by this person. In the next moment, another figure in white appeared with the same surging sword aura. He took a step forward and stood in the sky, confronting the swordsman in gray. Chapter 1903. The gray-robed swordsman and the white-robed swordsman attracted countless gazes in the sky. Many people stopped and raised their heads to look at the two figures. Very soon, someone recognized the two swordsmen and couldn't help but cry out. The gray-robed swordsman is Senior Xing Wuji and the white-robed swordsman is Senior Zhuo Bufan. Oh my God, they're the three great geniuses of the Xinwu Sword Pagoda. What are they doing? Are they going to fight to the death? They're both geniuses of the Xinwu Sword Pagoda. It wouldn't be good if any of them died. What do you mean by fight to the death? You're new here, so don't talk nonsense. Senior Xing and Zhuo are going to fight with their swords. They do it every year to see who can improve more. Everyone discussed and their eyes lit up. They were looking forward to the next fight. The three great geniuses of the Xinwu Sword Pagoda. Nie Tian could not help but smile faintly when he heard the discussions. He sent the senses of his soul towards Xing Wuji and Zhuo Bufan. He discovered that both of them were peak over gods, and their laws of the sword had reached a state of selflessness. They seemed to be around the same age as Jian Jingyun and Gui Wuchan. They were indeed geniuses to be able to reach such a level. Even though Jian Jingyun and Gui Wuchan weren't as talented as Nie Tian, they were definitely one of the top geniuses in the 9 realms. However, Nie Tian was too much of a genius. He made Jian Jingyun and Gui Wuchan seem rather mediocre. Interesting. I'd like to see just how strong the geniuses of the Xinwu Sword Pagoda are. Gui Wuchan snickered and a hint of excitement flashed through his eyes. Since they had the chance to witness the fight between the two great geniuses, Nie Tian and the others obviously had to stop and watch. Xing Wuji, it's been a year. You haven't improved much, the white-robed Zhuo Bufan teased Xing Wuji rudely. It's enough to deal with you, Zhuo Bufan laughed with disdain. It seemed that the two of them had been fighting since they were young, and neither of them was willing to submit to the other. Xing Wuji, aren't you afraid that the wind will cut your tongue? Little junior sister won't like people like you who talk nonsense. Zhuo Bufan laughed and said with jealousy in his mouth. Zhuo Bufan, whether little junior sister likes me or not is between us. It has nothing to do with you. Even if she doesn't like me, she definitely won't like you, Xing Wuji said, his face full of disdain. At the same time, his sword energy increased exponentially. When Ye Tian heard the conversation between the two, he couldn't help but laugh. No wonder the two of them were so hostile. It turned out that they were pursuing the same girl. Since the little junior sister they spoke of was able to gain the favor of the two of them, she must not be an ordinary woman. When Zhuo Bufan heard Xing Wuji's words, his face darkened. Then he said loudly, Xing Wuji, there are many people here today. Why don't we make a big bet? Fine, let's do it. I, Xing Wuji, am not afraid of you. Even if it's a bet of my life, I won't hesitate. Xing Wuji laughed arrogantly. He wasn't afraid at all. Xing Wuji, don't regret it. This time, I'm betting on something more important than your pig head. Zhuo Bufan chuckled and a strange light flashed in his eyes. Don't keep me guessing. Just say it. Xing Wuji looked arrogant and didn't care at all. Xing Wuji, listen carefully. This time, I'm betting on who is qualified to pursue little junior sister. Zhuo Bufan cleared his throat and said loudly, This battle between you and me will determine who is qualified to pursue little junior sister. If you lose, you will automatically withdraw. If I lose, it's the same. What do you think? This. Xing Wuji suddenly froze. His eyes couldn't help but narrow and his expression froze. He clearly didn't expect that Zhuo Bufan would bet with him on this. To Xing Wuji, this was indeed more important than his life. However, Xing Wuji had already boasted in front of so many people. If he didn't agree now, he would lose a lot of face. More importantly, what would little junior sister think of him if she found out? Xing Wuji thought quickly. He couldn't make up his mind. He didn't know if he should bet with Zhuo Bufan or not. Zhuo Bufan saw Xing Wuji's hesitation and couldn't help but sneer. He said, Xing Wuji, if you're afraid, then forget it. You're full of empty words anyway. Little junior sister will never like someone like you. At this time, the crowd couldn't stand it anymore and started discussing. What's wrong with Brother Xing? He's too scared. He's a genius of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda after all. Why is he so afraid of Brother Zhuo? What do you know? Last year, Brother Xing lost to Brother Zhuo. It's normal for him to be afraid of losing this time. If Brother Xing doesn't agree to this bet, how will he survive in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda in the future? He might as well kill himself with a piece of tofu. Everyone discussed amongst themselves, which made Xing Wuji even more confused. He was indeed a bit afraid of Zhuo Bufan. If he lost this time, then he really wouldn't have the right to pursue little junior sister. Xing Wuji, since you don't dare to bet, then forget it. I don't think there's any need for this sword competition. Let's go home. Zhuo Bufan sneered and got ready to leave. Xing Wuji saw this and immediately panicked. He blurted out, I'll bet. But as soon as he said this, Xing Wuji immediately regretted it. His expression became extremely ugly. That's more like a man. Zhuo Bufan had already expected this. He laughed and then his expression changed. His entire body's sword force surged and spread out like a tidal wave, filling the sky. What a powerful aura! When everyone saw this scene, their expressions suddenly changed, and their expressions became horrified. The sword force released by Zhuo Bufan was many times stronger than Xing Wuji's. Huh! Nie Tian saw this and his expression also changed. Then he couldn't help but shake his head and smile. He thought to himself, this Zhuo Bufan is really cunning. He hid his true strength. His level of swordsmanship has reached the beginner level of swordsmanship and martial arts as one. Previously, Nie Tian sensed that Zhuo Bufan's level of swordsmanship was selfless swordsmanship. But now, he realized that Zhuo Bufan's level of swordsmanship had reached the beginner level of swordsmanship and martial arts as one. Selfless swordsmanship and martial arts as one were only one level apart, but the gap between the two was like the difference between heaven and earth. Zhuo Bufan was indeed cunning. He first hid his true strength and then angered Xing Wuji. In the end, he forced Xing Wuji to agree to the bet. Actually, Xing Wuji wasn't weak either. Looking at his sword intent, there were signs that he had reached the level of swordsmanship and martial arts as one. But now, Xing Wuji was definitely no match for Zhuo Bufan. It was no exaggeration to say that right now, Zhuo Bufan could defeat Xing Wuji with one move. Zhuo Bufan, you're shameless. Xing Wuji finally understood. He roared and his entire body was shaking. Chapter 1904. In the sky, Zhuo Bufan stepped out. His chi was like a rainbow. On the other hand, Xing Wuji's face looked terrible. He didn't have any chi and he didn't even have the courage to fight anymore. It wasn't that Xing Wuji wasn't strong enough. It was because he and Zhuo Bufan had fought too many times. The two of them were evenly matched and they both won and lost. But Zhuo Bufan's sword cultivation level suddenly increased and his combat ability increased by leaps and bounds. Xing Wuji had no chance of winning. Xing Wuji, are you planning to give up without fighting? Zhuo Bufan looked at the dejected Xing Wuji and couldn't attack him directly. He could only sneer. Motherf ***, I'm going to fight. Xing Wuji was provoked by Zhuo Bufan and he immediately became furious. His eyes were spitting fire and he shouted, "For my little sister, I will fight you!" As his voice faded away, Xing Wuji's silhouette moved and the black sword on his back was unsheathed. Instantly, sword intent surged out of him like a tsunami and formed a terrifying sword shadow in the sky that headed towards Zhuo Bufan. You overestimate yourself. Zhuo Bufan faced Xing Wuji's sword attack and coldly snickered. He lifted the corner of his lips and said, I will defeat you with one attack. Zhuo Bufan's silhouette moved and a thin sword appeared in his hand. He stabbed forward and his sword intent was extremely sharp. It turned into a whistling sword shadow that shot forward. The two swords collided in the sky and the space suddenly froze. Then, waves of chi exploded and an infinite amount of sword intent wreaked havoc in the space. In the next moment, a muffled sound was heard and a silhouette was flung out, leaving a bloody trail in the sky. Everyone's eyes trembled and they looked over. The bloody silhouette in the sky was Xing Wuji. Xing Wuji stabilized his body and stared at Zhuo Bufan. His eyes were as red as fire. But just as he was about to speak, he spat out a mouthful of blood and his entire face turned as white as paper. One attack. Zhuo Bufan defeated Xing Wuji with only one attack. This was the shocking difference between the sword realm and the sword realm. That guy called Zhuo Bufan is too monstrous. He defeated Xing Wuji with a single sword strike, Gui Wuchan said in shock. I'm afraid Zhuo Bufan showed mercy. Otherwise, Xing Wuji would already be a corpse, Jian Jingyun said calmly. Yes. Nie Tian nodded. He was not surprised by the result and said, right now, Zhuo Bufan is indeed much more powerful than Xing Wuji. However, Xing Wuji's talent in swordsmanship is not bad. He should be able to break through to the realm of sword and martial arts integration very soon. The monstrous swordsman of the Xinwu Sword Pagoda is indeed terrifying. Gui Wukan's expression changed slightly. He could tell that Zhuo Bufan and Xing Wuji were about the same age as him, but their abilities were not inferior to his. Zhuo Bufan is very strong, but he used such a despicable method to force Xing Wuji to make a bet with him. It's really despicable. Gui Wu Kuangsha, who was at the side, couldn't bear to watch any longer. He shook his head and said. Nie Tian nodded slightly. Zhuo Bufan had indeed used some cunning method. However, he had defeated Xing Wuji with his own abilities after all, so it was not a big deal. However, Xing Wuji had lost the right to pursue his little sister. This was definitely a big blow to him. At this moment, Nie Tian really wanted to see what kind of person the little sister that Zhuo Bufan and Xing Wuji were talking about was. How could the two of them be so infatuated with her? Haha. Xing Wuji, you've lost. Zhuo stepped out. He seemed very arrogant. He was actually very excited. He laughed loudly and said, "Little sister is mine. Little sister is mine." When the people below saw this, they were all speechless. Zhuo was too excited. Did he have to be so happy? Zhuo, who said that I'm yours? However, just as Zhuo was dancing with joy, a cold voice rang out, and then a purple-clothed figure appeared and stood in midair. This is... Everyone looked at the figure in purple. When they saw the person's face clearly, they couldn't help but be stunned. The figure in purple looked very young. She was about 20 years old. Her facial features were very delicate. The thin purple shirt accentuated her perfect figure. Her big eyes were shining with anger. Her hands were on her waist, and her little mouth was pouting. She looked very mischievous and cute. When Nye Tian saw this figure, he was stunned for a moment. Then, he returned to normal. This girl was indeed very beautiful. However, in Nye Tian's eyes, she was still slightly inferior to Imo Rushi, Cher, and Rui Qinyu. This girl must be the little sister that Zhuo and Xing Wuji mentioned. She's not bad. Nye Tian looked at the figure in purple and smiled faintly. Yes, she's quite beautiful. However, Gue Wuchan, who was next to Nye Tian, had a strong reaction. His teeth chattered for a long time before he finally said a sentence. Jian Jingyun's reaction was even more exaggerated than Gue Wuchan's. He was dumbfounded and did not say anything for a long time. Nye Tian glanced at Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan and smiled faintly. Although the two of them were much older than Nye Tian, their emotional experiences were not as rich as Nye Tian's. Most of the cultivators in these realms were obsessed with cultivation. Many of them were tens of thousands of years old, and still did not understand the feelings between men and women. This girl has such terrifying talent. At this moment, Guiwu Kuangsha also spoke. He stared fixedly at the girl in purple, and said with a deep voice. Nye Tian was stunned. Even Guiwu Kuangsha was so surprised. This girl's talent was definitely not bad. Nye Tian immediately activated the holographic divine glyph and sensed it. His entire body froze, and his eyes were filled with shock. This girl in purple was actually a peak over god. She had reached the realm of sword and martial arts as one. What was even more terrifying was that Nye Tian could sense that the girl in purple seemed to be around 1,000 years old. Nye Tian didn't realize what was going on until more than 10 seconds later. He took a deep breath and was speechless. 1,000 years old was really too young in the realms. The girl in purple actually had the strength of a peak over god. Her talent in martial arts was also extremely terrifying. She could almost step into the over-god realm before the age of 10,000 without a doubt. However, her talent in martial arts was still not the most terrifying thing about her. The most terrifying thing about her was that her cultivation in the way of the sword was actually at the realm of sword and martial arts as one. She was only 1,000 years old, yet she could actually reach such a realm in the way of the sword. Her talent in the way of the sword was so terrifying that it made people's hair stand on end. It must be known that Guiwu Kuangsha had already lived for hundreds of thousands of years, yet he was only at the realm of sword and martial arts as one. Moreover, Guiwu Kuangsha was also a genius in the way of the sword. This girl in purple was a true monstrous-level swordsman. Geniuses in the way of the sword like Zhuo and Xing Wuji could only be described as mediocre in front of this girl in purple. Chapter 1905. This girl in purple is too scary. Guiwu Kuangsha looked at the girl in shock. Among all the people Guiwu Kuangsha had met, there was only one person whose talent in swordsmanship could compare to the girl in purple, Nye Tian. Even though Nye Tian was only at the essence of sword, he was much younger than the girl in purple, so his talent in swordsmanship wasn't any weaker than hers. That's the top genius of the Shinwu Sword Pagoda, Lien Wui. Someone exclaimed after recognizing the purple-clad girl. Lien Wui? The one who's known as the most talented swordsman in the history of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda? Someone who saw Lien Wui for the first time exclaimed. Lien Wui might be young, but she had a great reputation in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Of the three geniuses in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, Zhuo Bufan and Xing Wuji, Lien Wui was the undisputed number one genius. The two masters of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda believed that Lien Wui was the most talented swordsman in the past 1,000,000 years. Lien Wui's talent was indeed worthy of the title of the most talented swordsman. Nie Tian looked at Lien Wui and smiled. He murmured, "The Shenwu Sword Pagoda is indeed unusual to have produced such a genius." Lien Wui's talent in martial arts was indeed shocking, but Nie Tian thought it was acceptable. He had seen an even more talented swordsman, and that was Cher. In Nie Tian's opinion, Cher's talent in swordsmanship was definitely above Lien Wui's. Thinking about Cher, Nie Tian's expression became serious. He didn't know how Cher was doing in the inescapable net, so he couldn't help but feel sad. Junior sister. At this time, Zhuo Bufan came back to his senses and smiled nervously. He was so excited that his tongue couldn't stop moving. Why are you here? Little junior sister, I. Xing Wuji opened his mouth as well, but he looked embarrassed. He didn't have the courage to continue. He was defeated by Zhuo Bufan and had lost the qualification to pursue the dancing costume. Zhuo Bufan, Xing Wuji, you should be calling me senior sister, right? Lien Wui's eyes flickered and she said angrily. This. Zhuo Bufan and Xing Wuji were stunned at the same time. They were speechless and didn't know what to say. Lien Wui giggled and said, "You two idiots, your talents are too lacking. You two are no match for me even if you join hands, yet you still have the face to compete in swords here? What a joke." Zhuo Bufan and Xing Wuji's faces darkened at Lien Wui's scolding. They didn't even dare to look at her. In fact, the two of them felt very wronged. It wasn't because their talent was too bad, it was because Lien Wui's talent was too good. Zhuo Bufan, Xing Wuji, don't the two of you want to woo me? I'm in a good mood today, so I'll give you two a chance. Lien Wui crossed her arms in front of her chest and glanced at Zhuo Bufan and Xing Wuji. What chance? Zhuo Bufan and Xing Wuji exclaimed at the same time, their eyes shining. Lien Wui giggled and said, "I'll be with whoever can defeat me. How about that?" This. Zhuo Bufan and Xing Wuji heard Lien Wui's words and immediately became like frosted eggplants, completely wilting. They didn't know how many times they had been beaten by Lien Wui. Even if Zhuo Bufan's swordsmanship had improved to the realm of swordsmanship and martial arts as one, he was no match for Lien Wui. What's wrong? Why aren't you talking? Lien Wui looked at Zhuo Bufan and Xing Wuji, laughed and said, "Since you're no match for me, be obedient little brothers from now on and don't say stupid things about wooing me. Do you understand?" Zhuo Bufan and Xing Wuji's expressions were extremely ugly, and they felt extremely wronged. Both of them liked to practice dance clothes, but unfortunately, practice clothes was too much of a genius, leaving them far behind. The two of them couldn't even see the shadow of practice clothes. Nie Tian looked at the scene in the sky and couldn't help but shake his head and smile. This Lien Wui was quite interesting. She was so pure and cute. "Senior sister, I like you too. Can I chase you?" At this time, someone below shouted. His eyes were bloodshot as he stared at Lien Wui. Lien Wui wasn't angry. She smiled proudly and pointed at everyone with her snow-white little finger. "I just got rid of two big idiots, so I'm in a good mood. I'll give all of you a chance. If one of you can defeat me, I'll be with him. How about that?" "Little junior sister, you can't joke about this." As soon as Lien Wui spoke, Zhuo Bufan immediately cried out and said with a horrified expression, "Zhuo Bufan, what did you call me?" Lien Wui glared and pointed at Zhuo Bufan. Senior sister." Zhuo Bufan called her senior sister with difficulty and said, "You can't say what you just said." There are people who came to Evil Wind Island from the outside, and there are even many superior gods. If they fight, you really won't be a match for them. Zhuobuffan had considered everything. There were indeed many people here who weren't from the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, but there were real strong people among them. Not to mention others, Nie Tian had a strong person with him, Guiwu Kwangsha. Of course, Guiwu Kwangsha wouldn't fight. He wouldn't be interested in a little girl. Nie Tian wouldn't fight either. He wasn't interested in Lien Wui. Even if he fought, he might not be a match for Lien Wui. If Di Shi Tian fought, he would probably be able to kill this little girl. Nie Tian suddenly thought of Di Shi Tian and couldn't help but say to himself. However, Di Shi Tian clearly wasn't interested in Lien Wui. He was only interested in reaching the Saint Plain. Nie Tian and the others weren't interested, but it didn't mean that others weren't interested. Nie Tian remembered that some of the people who came to Evil Wind Island with him were also superior gods. If the people who came to Evil Wind Island before were counted, there would probably be more superior gods. Among these people, there would definitely be someone who could be a match for Lien Wui. Zhuobuffan was very nervous because of this. However, Lien Wui didn't seem to care at all. She said in a domineering manner, "Senior sister, I'm not afraid. If there really is a powerful being here, then tell them to come out. I'll just stand here and see who's my match." Nie Tian couldn't help but be speechless when he saw Lien Wui like this. Although this little girl was 1,000 years old, she had probably been cultivating all the time, so she still had the mind of a teenage girl. "Haha. Miss Lien is really domineering. I admires you." Before Lien Wui's voice faded away, an old voice was heard. Then, a figure flew into the sky and appeared in the sky. A pair of wrinkled eyes stared at Lien Wui and said, "Let I experience Miss Lien's strength." As soon as this old man appeared, everyone was stunned. Their faces were as ugly as if they had eaten a fly. Chapter 1906. The old swordsman's appearance threw the crowd into chaos. Everyone stared at him and couldn't help but exclaim, F***CK. Who the hell is this old man? He also wants to pursue Miss Lien Wui? This old cow is eating the cradle, isn't it? That's right, if he really wins against Miss Lien Wui, it won't be a flower stuck in cow dung, it'll be a flower stuck in dog dung. This old man is so shameless. He's so old and yet he still dares to challenge Miss Lien Wui. His shamelessness has reached his grandma's house. The crowd discussed among themselves, each more unpleasant than the last. However, their words didn't affect the elderly swordsman in the slightest. He was still looking at Lien Wui calmly, and there was an undisguised lustful light in his eyes. One had to admit that this old man was quite shameless. He didn't care about the crowd's reaction at all. What the hell is this? Lien Wui's smiling face was as yellow as a piece of paper. She looked extremely embarrassed as she stared at the old swordsman in shock. She wanted to cry but had no tears. She was just a young girl. She didn't expect such a shameless person to exist in this world. Zhuobuffan looked at the old swordsman and was also dumbfounded. However, he was still calm and immediately shouted, "Where did this pervert come from? The Shenwu Sword Pagoda isn't a place for you to behave atrociously." With that, Zhuobuffan stepped forward and unleashed his sword aura to block Lien Wui. "Humph." The old swordsman sneered and said, "The people of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda have quite the temper. It was this little girl who said that she would give everyone a chance. Was what she said just now just bullsh*t? The old man's words immediately caused a commotion among the crowd. This old man is interesting. Although he's shameless, the Shenwu Sword Pagoda is bullying people by doing this. That's right. Is Miss Lien Wui going to take back what she said just like that? If that's the case, then the Shenwu Sword Pagoda's reputation will be ruined before all the swordsmen in the world." Lien Wui couldn't help but blush when she heard everyone's discussion. When the old swordsman appeared, she began to regret saying what she shouldn't have. However, since things had already come to this, it was impossible for her to take back her words. None of the people present were good people. They were just here to watch the show. Many of them had the same idea as the elderly swordsman. They were eager to give it a try. They didn't want Lien Wui to take back her words. All of you, shut up. At this moment, Lien Wui stepped forward with a serious expression on her face as she roared, I've always kept my word. If any of you have the strength to challenge me, then hurry up and challenge me. Do you think I'll be afraid of you? Lien Wui's words stunned everyone for a moment before many of them snickered. Anyone with a brain could see that the elderly swordsman was clearly trying to enrage Lien Wui. Lien Wui was simple and naive. As expected, she fell for it. She made her decision right from the start. This time, there was really no way for her to take back her words. Zhuo Bufan and Xing Wuji glanced at each other after hearing Lien Wui's words. Their faces were as dark as could be. Lien Wui's words carried weight. It was going to be difficult to clean up this mess. Xing Wuji, go and invite the sword master. Leave this to me, Zhuo Bufan said to Xing Wuji telepathically. Xing Wuji replied. His silhouette flickered as he left. Old thing, if you want to challenge little sister, you'll have to defeat me first. Zhuo Bufan saw that Xing Wuji had gone to invite the sword master of Shenwu. He stepped forward and stared at the elderly swordsman. Of course, he wouldn't blame Lien Wui. Thus, he vented all his anger on the elderly swordsman. Humph! The old swordsman laughed gloomily, and his hawk-like eyes stared at Zhuo Bufan as he said with cold disdain, Stinking brat, you want to fight me with just your strength? You're truly overestimating yourself. How arrogant! Zhuo Bufan let out a low roar and took another step forward. His aura rose, and a terrifying sword intent surged around him. What incredible energy! Everyone was visibly shaken by what they were seeing. Zhuo Bufan's energy was even stronger than when he had fought Xing Wuji. It seemed he had been hiding his true strength. Nie Tian looked at Zhuo Bufan and then shifted his gaze to the old swordsman. He couldn't help but frown and think to himself, Zhuo Bufan's strength is indeed not weak, but it's impossible for him to defeat this old man. Nie Tian had long since realized that the elderly swordsman was an early paramount god with an elementary level of sword and martial arts as one. That level of strength was barely passable for the elderly swordsman. Zhuo Bufan's cultivation base was the same as the elderly swordsman's, but he was only a peak over god. Therefore, it would be very difficult for him to defeat the elderly swordsman. It takes strength to save a damsel in distress, brat. Unfortunately for you, you're too weak. The elderly swordsman glanced coldly at Zhuo Bufan, his lips curling into a cold smile as he radiated an aura of death. The elderly swordsman took a step forward, and a long, thin sword appeared in his hand. He stabbed it out, and his sword will condensed into a murderous sword shadow that shot toward Zhuo Bufan. Zhuo Bufan was taken aback. He hadn't expected the elderly swordsman to attack without warning. It was almost like a sneak attack. Boom! In that moment of crisis, Zhuo Bufan didn't panic. He stabbed out with his sword, and a sword shadow appeared, whistling through the air like a dragon. Boom! The next moment, the two sword shadows slammed into each other, causing the air to tremble and a figure to fly backward. It was none other than Zhuo Bufan. Zhuo Bufan was already at a disadvantage against the elderly swordsman, and now that he had attacked in a hurry, he was obviously no match for the elderly swordsman. Zhuo Bufan. Lien Wui's eyes flashed when she saw Zhuo Bufan flying backward. She blurred into motion, unleashing her sword will to catch him. Are you okay? Lien Wui saw that Zhuo Bufan was covered in blood. Her beautiful eyes flashed, and she was about to cry. Little sister, I'm fine. Zhuo Bufan spoke with difficulty, and a smile hung on his lips. But as soon as he finished speaking, he passed out, and his life force began to fade. Zhuo Bufan. Lien Wui felt that Zhuo Bufan's breath was weakening. Her heart ached, and tears flowed down her cheeks. Brat, you overestimate yourself. You want to be a hero and save a damsel in distress? What an idiot! The elderly swordsman smiled coldly, and his eyes were cold. You shameless! Lien Wui suddenly raised her head and looked at the elderly swordsman. Her beautiful eyes were filled with anger, and her killing intent was revealed. Give him to me. At that moment, a voice suddenly rang out, and a figure appeared next to Lien Wui. Chapter 1907. Lien Wui stared at the silver-haired swordsman who had suddenly appeared in front of her. Her pretty face stiffened when she sensed the strong confidence exuded from the silver-haired swordsman. The person who appeared next to Lien Wui was none other than Nie Tian. Give him to me, I can save him. Nie Tian looked at Lien Wui with a confident smile on his face. You! Lien Wui stared at Nie Tian with a look of astonishment on her face. She could feel that Zhuo Bufan's life force was weakening and could disappear at any time. She couldn't understand why Nie Tian was so confident that he could save Zhuo Bufan. Where did this silver-haired kid come from? At this time, the old swordsman looked at Nie Tian and sneered. Zhuo Bufan took a blow from my head-on. His Yuan meridians and godhead are seriously injured. He will die without a doubt. You're just a good-for-nothing high god, and you want to save him? What a joke! Nie Tian suddenly turned around and looked at the old swordsman with a cold expression. He didn't say a word and stretched out his palm. A powerful ball of energy appeared, releasing a strong life force. Lien Wui's expression changed drastically as she sensed the powerful life force aura. Her eyes then flickered with a hint of astonishment. Nie Tian didn't say a word. He took a step forward and the energy in his palm flowed directly into Zhuo Bufan's body. Zhuo Bufan's body suddenly trembled, and then a strong breath of life surged out of his body. His originally pale face slowly turned ruddy. Don't worry, his life is no longer in danger. Nie Tian smiled faintly. He looked at the old swordsman and raised his eyebrows in a provocative manner. How is this possible? The old swordsman couldn't help but cry out when he felt that Zhuo Bufan's life force had suddenly stabilized. He clearly felt that Zhuo Bufan's life force was getting weaker and weaker, but how did Nie Tian bring Zhuo Bufan back to life with just a stream of energy? Just now, Zhuo Bufan's origin meridians and godhead had indeed suffered heavy injuries. If it had been someone else, they wouldn't have been able to save him. However, Nie Tian had the source of the earth in his body, which was the purest life force. As long as Zhuo Bufan was still breathing, Nie Tian could save him. Back then, when Long Aotian was seriously injured in the body of a true dragon, Nie Tian could save him. Therefore, Zhuo Bufan's injury was a piece of cake for him. Nie Tianling chuckled and lightly said, Your strength isn't bad, but your character isn't good. You're already so old, yet you still want to take advantage of others. I really don't know how you managed to live until now. Nie Tian did not know this old swordsman, but he could not stand the latter's despicable behavior. He saved Zhuo Bufan because he didn't want to see a genius swordsman die. Little bastard, you're courting death. The old swordsman's face flushed red from Nie Tian's words. He roared in anger and the sword qi around his body surged. He wanted to attack Nie Tian. Nie Tian showed no fear facing the old swordsman. Instead, he laughed and said to Lien Wui, Miss Lien, I'll leave this old man to you. Remember, you must kill him in one move. Lien Wui was slightly dazed. She didn't understand what Nie Tian meant. This little girl wants to kill I in one move? Is that even possible? The old swordsman sneered. Although his words were arrogant, he was much more cautious. After all, Lien Wui's strength wasn't something Zhuo Bufan could compare to. Smelly old man, you injured Zhuo Bufan. I won't let you off so easily. Lien Wui bellowed and took a step forward. Sword intent surged out from her body, filling the air with a terrifying sword intent. What a strong sword intent! Feeling Lien Wui's sword intent at such a close distance, Nie Tian was even more shocked. He could even feel that Lien Wui's sword intent was almost on par with the ghost martial wild sand. Judging from the sword intent, Lien Wui indeed had the strength to kill the old swordsman. However, Nie Tian could also see that Lien Wui didn't have any experience in life or death battles. He even suspected that Lien Wui hadn't killed anyone before because he didn't feel any killing intent from her sword intent. Without killing intent, no matter how strong the sword intent was, its threat would be limited. Little girl, you have to be careful. At this time, the old swordsman let out a strange cry and immediately attacked. The long sword in his hand slashed through the air and a mighty sword shadow poured down like a waterfall, heading straight for Lien Wui. Lien Wui's beautiful eyes flickered. Her silhouette flickered as a purple longsword appeared in her hand. She abruptly stabbed forward, and a purple sword intent surged out like a tsunami, condensing into a purple sword shadow that whistled through the air. So powerful! Seeing the scene in the air, everyone couldn't help but exclaim in shock. This was the first time Lien Wui had attacked, and the strength of her sword intent was shocking. Boom! In the next moment, the two sword shadows collided in the air, creating a loud explosion. The purple sword shadow's momentum was like a dragon and directly crushed the other sword shadow. Not good! The old swordsman couldn't help but let out a startled cry when he saw the situation was far from good. Lien Wui's strength had exceeded his expectations. Bang! Then, a muffled sound rang out and the old swordsman's body was sent flying, leaving a bloody trail in the air. Gas dash! Seeing this scene, the crowd gasped in unison and their faces were filled with fear. Lien Wui was truly terrifying. With one strike, the old swordsman was sent flying. Seeing this, Nie Tian shook his head and sighed. What a naive little girl. She didn't have the heart to kill under these circumstances. Nie Tian knew very well that Lien Wui didn't use her full strength. She had held back at the last second. Or else the old swordsman would have died a horrible death. Damn old man, this is how powerful I am! Lien Wui shouted and took a step forward. Her eyes were not filled with ferocity, but with a hint of playfulness and cuteness. The old swordsman steadied himself and stared at Lien Wui with a pair of venomous eyes. He walked over step by step and said, "Lady Lien's strength is extraordinary, this old man admires you. I concede defeat. It's good that you know how powerful this lady is." The young girl in the dancing dress raised her snow-white chin and said with a proud expression. As the old swordsman spoke, he was already less than 100 meters away from Lien Wui. A cold smile hung on his lips and his eyes flickered with evil light. "Watch out!" Just then, Nie Tian suddenly sensed something and yelled. "Little girl, you are far too naive." Almost at the same time, the old swordsman roared. Then, he leaped into the air and stabbed forward with his sword. An extremely fast sword shadow flew toward Lien Wui. Lien Wui's eyes trembled and she reacted immediately. However, she was still one step too late. Bang! After a muffled sound, Lien Wui's body flew backward. Her purple figure drew a bloody trail in the air. Chapter 1908. Nie Tian move. While he was still in the air, his whole body released a sword will that transformed into a soft force that steadily caught Lien Wui. "Miss Lien, are you all right?" Nie Tian stepped forward and asked Lien Wui. Lien Wui steadied herself in the air. Her purple clothes were dyed red with blood. There was a trace of blood at the corner of her mouth. Her face was very pale, but she stubbornly said, "I'm fine." Nie Tian used his divine sense to examine Lien Wui's body. After confirming that the latter's life was indeed not in danger, he was relieved. In a fight between experts, life and death is often decided in a split second. Lien Wui was indeed stronger than the elderly swordsman, but not to the extent that the difference was like heaven and earth. The elderly swordsman suddenly attacked Lien Wui while she was defenseless. It was already a miracle that she survived. Shameless! Nie Tian suddenly turned around and looked at the elderly swordsman with a gloomy face. Coldly, he spat out 2 words. His eyes surged with murderous intent. The crowd came to their senses and looked at the elderly swordsman with complicated expressions. Although they liked to watch a good show, the elderly swordsman was too despicable. He had completely exceeded the limits of an ordinary person's tolerance. Can shame be used as food? The elderly swordsman didn't pay attention to the crowd's comments. He sneered and stared at Nietian with a pair of vicious wolf-like eyes. He said, "Silver-haired brat, Zhuobuffan tried to be a hero and was almost killed by I. Do you think you are more powerful than Zhuobuffan?" With a faint smile, Nietian said, "You'll soon find out whether I'm powerful or not." The crowd looked at Nietian and couldn't help but discuss. Is this kid a madman? Yeah, even Zhuobuffan was defeated by that old man. He's just a lowly high god. Does he think he can save the damsel in distress? He won't die if he doesn't court death. This kid is a classic example of courting death. The elderly swordsman couldn't help but let out a cold smile. He said, "Silver-haired brat, you heard them. They say that you are courting death. I also thinks that you are courting death." Nietian smiled. His face immediately turned gloomy and said, "Do it. Courting death." The old swordsman roared. His eyes darkened as killing intent flashed in his eyes. The long sword in his hand stabbed out as he roared, "Die for me!" Boom! The sword struck out, and the shadow of the sword was like a mountain, majestically pressing towards Nietian. Nietian felt an immense pressure bearing down on him. Yet, his lips curled into a smile as terrifying black runes gushed forth from his body. His aura instantly soared to the extreme. "Godly sword!" shouted Nietian. He stabbed out with his sword, causing the space around him to freeze. It was as if space itself was about to collapse. When the crowd saw this, they were dumbfounded. They had no idea what was going on. Nietian clearly possessed late-stage high god strength. How could he suddenly erupt with such terrifying power? Boom! In the next moment, the 2 sword shadows collided with each other. Terrifying sword intent surged out, and billowing airwaves spread out in all directions. It seemed as if the sky was on the verge of collapsing. Ah! Immediately after, a miserable shriek sounded. The old swordsman's body was sent flying backwards. Unable to withstand the pressure of the sword intent, his body crumbled and turned into a bloody mist. Dead silence. The sudden scene caused the scene to fall into a deathly silence. Everyone was dumbfounded. They couldn't believe what they had just seen. Who could have imagined that Nietian, who only possessed high god strength, could kill the old swordsman with a single sword strike? The old swordsman was a genuine paramount god expert. His sword art strength had reached the realm of unity of sword and martial arts. It was truly terrifying that Nietian could instantly kill such an expert. Nietian's lips curled into a faint smile after killing the old swordsman with a single sword strike. His face was as calm as ever. He knew that there were many reasons why he could instantly kill the old swordsman with a single sword strike. Firstly, the old swordsman had been seriously injured by Lian Wui. Secondly, the old swordsman had a rival in love, so he didn't use his full strength to fight Nietian. That was why Nietian had been able to kill the old swordsman with a single sword strike. If it had been a normal fight, Nietian wouldn't have been able to defeat the old swordsman easily, much less kill him. Nietian's current battle prowess was roughly on par with an early paramount god. The old swordsman, on the other hand, was an early paramount god who had reached the realm of unity of sword and martial arts. That made him even stronger than an ordinary mid-paramount god. Second brother. At this moment, a furious howl rang out as a figure soared up into the sky. Sword intent gushed forth from his body, akin to the surging waves of the ocean. Second brother. Almost at the same time, another furious voice resounded, and then another figure appeared. His entire body surged with a terrifying sword intent, and his killing intent was piercingly cold. 2 figures appeared, sandwiching Nyetian between them. Both of them glared at Nyetian with venomous hatred, as if they wanted to skin him alive. Sensing the two's terrifying auras, Nyetian sent out his soul awareness to examine them. Immediately afterwards, his eyes flickered with astonishment. These two old men looked exactly the same as the old man who had been killed by Nyetian with a single strike of his sword. However, their auras were much more powerful than the old man who had been killed. Both of them were late paramount gods, and their cultivation of the sword had reached the level of unity of sword and martial arts. Clearly, they were brothers with the old man who had just been killed, and judging from their appearances, they were most likely twins. "Those three are the three fierce ones of the North Sea," someone exclaimed when they recognized the two old men. "The three fierce ones of the North Sea," someone blurted out. "Don't tell me they're the three fierce ones who love to wipe out entire families?" "That's them. No wonder that old man was so arrogant. He actually dared to attack a genius swordsman from the divine martial sword pagoda. So he's one of the three fierce ones of the North Sea. I heard that the three fierce ones of the North Sea are notorious for their crimes. But considering how strong they are, they wouldn't dare to provoke the divine martial sword pagoda. What do you know? The three fierce ones of the North Sea are from the myriad evil sect, one of the top powers in the 9 realms. They're no weaker than the divine martial sword pagoda. So that's how it is. It seems the three fierce ones of the North Sea are using the myriad evil sect's name to do evil. No wonder they're still alive. Everyone began to talk about the three fierce ones of the North Sea. Nyetian couldn't help but frown and smile wryly. It seems I'm in big trouble again. The myriad evil sect wasn't any weaker than the divine martial sword pagoda. You killed my brother, you stinking brat. I will kill you. Yang Mu, the eldest of the three fierce ones of the North Sea, unleashed a terrifying energy. Big brother, let's attack together and get revenge for second brother. Yang Sun, the third brother, let out a wild roar, and a ferocious look appeared on his face as he directly launched an attack. With a thrust of his sword, a sword shadow of desolation and desolation shot out towards Nyetian. Not good. Nyetian frowned and his expression flickered. With a thought, he opened the 9 polarities and shouted, "Sakra heaven, stop him for me." Chapter 1909. Boom! Yang Sen's sword fell from the sky, and a huge sword shadow whistled toward Nyetian. However, at this moment, a figure appeared out of thin air, followed by a sharp and murderous sword shadow. Rumble! The two sword shadows collided in the sky, and the air rumbled. The terrifying sword will wreaked havoc in the air. Bang! Bang! In the next moment, 2 muffled sounds were heard, and 2 figures were sent flying, but then they stood firmly in the sky. Who are you?" Yang Sun steadied himself and looked at the person in front of him. When he saw the person's face, he couldn't help but be stunned. He never would have thought that the person who blocked the fatal sword strike for Nyetian at the critical moment was a 6 or 7-year-old child. How is this possible? Am I seeing things? The crowd was also shocked when they saw Socration's appearance. They couldn't believe their eyes. For a child of 6 or 7 years old to be able to block the deadly attack of a late paramount god with a single sword strike was terrifying to the extreme. The talent Socration displayed could no longer be described as monstrous. He was simply a monster. His sword will. At that moment, someone sensed that Socration's sword will was very terrifying. It seemed to be the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. They were so shocked that they were so excited that their tongues were spinning. Nyetian was stunned for a moment, and then he regretted it. He shouldn't have let Socration appear at this time. The latter was the key to persuading the divine martial sword master to bring forward the evil edge sword competition. If Socration had appeared too early, the divine martial sword master wouldn't have been shocked enough. Who are you? Socration's figure stood in the sky, his body surging with a terrifying sword will. His eyes were cold and murderous, giving people a strong sense of oppression. Yang Sen's eyes narrowed, and then he looked at Yang Mu and shouted, "Big brother, let's attack together and kill this monster." "Okay." Yang Mu roared, and then he took a step forward. He stood with Yang Sen, ready to join forces to kill Socration. Both of them were very strong. Either one of them had the strength to fight against Di Shirtian. If they joined forces, Di Shirtian might not be their opponent. Three Vicious of the North Sea, your second brother, Yang Lin, is already dead. Haven't you caused enough trouble? However, at this moment, a deep and powerful voice rang out. Immediately after, a figure appeared behind Nie Tian and Sakura. It was precisely Ghost Marshal Kwang Sha. "Nie Tian, the little friend beside you, if I'm not mistaken, has reached the legendary realm of sword and martial arts unity." Ghost Marshal Wild Sand arrived at Nie Tian's side and transmitted his voice. Guiwu Kwang Sha had never seen Sakura before. Seeing him now, one could well imagine the shock in his heart. He simply couldn't understand what kind of existence Sakura was. If it was said that an ordinary 6-year-old child was a swordsman who had reached the legendary realm of sword and martial unity, the Ghost Marshal Wild Sand would rather die than believe it. He felt that Sakura's identity was definitely strange. "Senior Ghost Marshal, he is my friend Sakura. He is indeed at the legendary realm of sword and martial arts unity." Nie Tian replied indifferently to Guiwu Kwang Sha, but didn't say anything else. Guiwu Kwang Sha nodded his head. He knew that Nie Tian was hiding something, but it wasn't good to directly ask. You are Ghost Marshal Kwang Sha?" At this time, the head of the Three Vicious of the North Sea, Yang Mu, finally recognized Guiwu Kwang Sha. He was stunned for a moment, and his face immediately stiffened. Guiwu Kwang Sha appearing here was something that Yang Mu had never imagined. "Yang Mu Yang Sin, I'll give you 3 seconds, scram immediately." Guiwu Kwang Sha looked at Yang Mu coldly, and spoke in a deep voice, extremely domineering. With Guiwu Kwang Sha's strength, if he wanted to kill the brothers Yang Mu and Yang Sun, it would only be a matter of an instant. However, he had to be cautious when doing things, because he didn't only represent himself, but also the Guiwu clan behind him. Provoking the Thousand Evil sect behind Yang Mu and Yang Sin for no reason was obviously not a wise move. Lord Guiwu Kwang Sha. How overbearing! The crowd looked at Guiwu Kwang Sha with eyes full of respect and worship. This was the majesty of an expert. Yang Mu and Yang Sin were suddenly stunned. Feeling the murderous intent from Guiwu Kwang Sha, they couldn't help but swallow their saliva, and a trace of fear appeared in their eyes. Although they really wanted to avenge Yang Lin, with Guiwu Kwang Sha around, they clearly had no chance. Now, the best path in front of them was to leave as soon as possible. "Let's go." Yang Mu was very decisive. Without any hesitation, he suddenly turned around and was ready to leave. However, at this moment, the void suddenly trembled, and then a figure appeared. A pair of cold eyes stared at Yang Mu and Yang Sin with heavy murderous intent. "You injured the people of the Shinwu Sword Pagoda on Evil Wind Island, and you want to leave just like that? Is there such a thing in this world?" The person who came said coldly. His voice wasn't loud, but it gave off an extremely terrifying pressure. "This person is so strong." Nie Tian looked at the person and felt his aura. His eyes couldn't help but tremble, and he exclaimed in his heart. Judging from this person's aura, he was faintly more terrifying than Guiwu Kwang Sha. Although he was trying to restrain his sword intent, it still couldn't hide the sharpness. This person is stronger than Lord Guiwu Kwang Sha. Could he be one of the 2 sword masters of the Shinwu Sword Pagoda? Nie Tian looked at the person and guessed. If there was someone in the Shinwu Sword Pagoda who was stronger than Guiwu Kwang Sha, then it was definitely the 2 sword masters. Xian Zhongfeng. At this moment, Guiwu Kwang Sha recognized the person and couldn't help but shout, "Master!" At the same time, Lien Wui also shouted excitedly. Hearing Lien Wui's shout, Nie Tian couldn't help but be surprised. He didn't expect the person to be her master. Hearing Guiwu Kwangsha's voice, everyone's eyes trembled, and then they exclaimed, Xian Zongfeng! He is Lord Xian Zongfeng! Oh my God, the Shenwu Sword Pagoda's Sword Master Xian Zongfeng is here! The Sword Master Xian Zongfeng is the real top figure in the sword world. It's worth dying to be able to see him with my own eyes. The crowd discussed animatedly. They were all very excited, and their eyes were burning with passion. It was as if their eyeballs were going to pop out. Guiwu Kwangsha and Xian Zongfeng were both big figures in the sword world, but the former's reputation was obviously weaker than the latter. Therefore, people were more shocked by Xian Zongfeng's appearance. Brother Guiwu, long time no see. Xian Zongfeng didn't care about the crowd's gazes. He only looked at Guiwu Kwangsha indifferently and greeted him. Then, he turned to Yang Mu and Yang Sin and said in a cold tone, Yang Mu, Yang Sin, I don't care how arrogant you are outside, but since you've come to Evil Wind Island, you'll have to tuck your tails between your legs. There's only one outcome for behaving atrociously on Evil Wind Island: death. As soon as the word death was said, the murderous intent in Xian Zongfeng's eyes intensified. The sword intent in his body was surging, and it could erupt at any time. Chapter 1910. Nie Tian felt Xian Zongfeng's murderous intent and couldn't help but mutter. Yang Mu and Yang Sun weren't weak, but they were nothing compared to top experts like Xian Zongfeng and Guiwu Kwangsha. At most, they were clowns. However, these two were from the Thousand Evil sect and had a powerful force behind them. Guiwu Kwangsha had considered this, so he didn't kill them. As the sword master of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, Xian Zongfeng wasn't an ordinary person. How could he not know what Yang Mu and Yang Sun represented? Xian Zongfeng's actions were a bit strange, but he still wanted to kill them. Yang Mu looked at Xian Zongfeng with trembling eyes, but he still calmed down and said, Sword Master Wu, you can't blame us for this. It was your good disciple who boasted about giving everyone a chance. Is there anything wrong with my second brother challenging you? Big brother is right. It was Lien Wui who provoked everyone. Second brother was just angry that the people of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda were so arrogant. He came out to help everyone, but he was framed and killed instead. The Shenwu Sword Pagoda is the one in the wrong, Yang Sin said before Yang Mu even finished speaking. The crowd was taken aback, and then many people nodded in agreement. They felt that what Yang Mu and Yang Sin said was very reasonable. Lien Wui was the one who said it. Yang Lin came out to challenge them, so one could say that he was shameless, but he didn't break the rules. The three of you have lived for hundreds of thousands of years. How can you take the words of a little girl seriously? Xian Zongfeng looked at Yang Mu and Yang Sin with a gloomy face and said, The three of you came to Evil Wind Island and hurt the people of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. We will not let this go. Yang Mu's expression froze when he saw how overbearing Xian Zongfeng was. He asked in surprise, Sword Master Wu, my second brother is dead here. What else do you want? I don't care about your brother's death. I only know that the two of you haven't paid the price yet. Xian Zongfeng's expression was dark and cold. I'll give you two a choice. Only one of you can leave here alive. Decide for yourself who lives and who dies. Well. Hearing Xian Zongfeng's words, everyone in the room took a deep breath and felt a chill down their spines. No one expected Xian Zongfeng to be so domineering, forcing the Yang brothers to make a choice between life and death. Guiwu Kwangsha only asked Yang Mu and Yang Sin to scram, but Xian Zongfeng wanted to force one of them to death. This method was really overbearing and ruthless. Nie Tian furrowed his brows in confusion. He could not understand why Xian Zongfeng would make such a stupid decision. Killing one and letting the other go, moreover, forcing the two brothers to make a choice of life and death was cruel, but not wise at all. By doing so, Not only did he deepen the hatred between them, but he also did not remove the root of the problem. It was obvious that he had allowed the other person to return to the 10,000 evil sect alive to report the news. Xian Zongfeng was clearly drawing hatred to the divine martial sword pagoda. The only advantage was that everyone could see how ruthless the divine martial sword pagoda was, so that those who came to Evil Wind Island in the future would not dare to go against the rules. Xian Zongfeng was definitely not that kind of stupid person. Nie Tian did not understand why he would make such a stupid decision. Swordmaster Wu, are you serious? Yang Mu's face was so gloomy that it was almost dripping water. Of course. Xian Zongfeng sneered, the killing intent in his eyes becoming more intense. Yang Mu's expression stiffened, and his face suddenly darkened with pain and embarrassment. He then suddenly looked at Yang Sen and shouted, "Third brother, go! Big brother, I!" Yang Sen screamed, unable to speak for a moment. "Go!" Yang Mu roared. His voice was somewhat heroic. Xian Zongfeng sneered and locked his eyes on Yang Mu, saying, "Yang Mu, good brotherly love, I will fulfill your wish." As soon as he finished speaking, Xian Zongfeng's body trembled, and a sword essence whistled out. It was like a thin line without any momentum, but it was extremely sharp and murderous. Pfft! In the next moment, the sound of flesh being cut could be heard. Yang Mu's body swayed, and his head flew into the air. Blood gushed out like a fountain, dyeing the sky red. "Big brother!" Yang Sen wailed when he saw this, and his body moved, grabbing Yang Mu's head in his arms. The crowd was stunned, and their faces were filled with shock. No one would have thought that a late-stage supreme god would be killed by such a primitive method of decapitation. Xian Zongfeng's attack was too strange. It seemed to have no momentum, but in fact it was terrifyingly lethal. Guiwu Kuangsha was stunned. He did not think that Xian Zongfeng would actually kill Yang Mu. Xian Zongfeng's action was no different from publicly offending the All-Evils Gate, which was not good for the divine martial sword pagoda. At this time, Xian Zongfeng looked at Yang Sen and said, "Yang Sen, are you still not leaving?" Yang Sen glared at Xian Zongfeng, and almost coughed up blood. He growled, "Xian Zongfeng, I, Yang Sen, swear to the heavens that I will never rest until I kill you." "Never rest, huh? I'll be waiting for you." Xian Zongfeng smiled cold, and his face was full of contempt. He waved his hand and said, "Now scram." Yang Sen's fists were clenched, and his body was trembling. After a long time, he turned around and left. Everyone looked at Yang Sen's disappearing figure in disbelief. It was hard to believe that Xian Zongfeng would let Yang Sen go just like that. Was he too confident? Or was he too stupid? Nie Tian felt that Xian Zongfeng was not being too confident, nor was he being stupid. He was doing it on purpose. He did not know why, but he had a feeling that Xian Zongfeng was not a simple person. Xian Zongfeng looked in the direction where Yang Sen disappeared and smiled coldly. The corner of his mouth curled up into a strange smile. At this moment, Xian Zongfeng's eyes suddenly turned to Nie Tian and asked in a cold voice, "Kid, who are you?" Seeing this, Lien Wui didn't wait for Nie Tian to speak. She hurriedly stepped forward and said, "Teacher, he's not a bad person. He helped me save Zhuo Bufan and killed that stinky old man." Xian Zongfeng's eyes froze when he heard Lien Wui's words. Then, he sneered and said, "Wui, are you joking with your teacher? How could a late-stage high-god swordsman of sword essence kill Yang Lin, one of the 3 fierce beasts of the North Sea?" "Teacher, he really killed that old man. Everyone saw it," Lien Wui hastily said when she saw that Xian Zongfeng did not believe her. Xian Zongfeng's face slightly changed. He looked at Guiwu Kuangsha and asked, "Brother Guiwu, is what Wui said true?" "Yes," Guiwu Kuangsha nodded and said, "Yang Lin was indeed killed by Nie Tian." Xian Zongfeng's face changed again. The way he looked at Nie Tian suddenly changed into surprise and shock, and even a hint of fear. Chapter 1911. Xian Zongfeng looked at Nie Tian with a strange expression, as if he was thinking about something. Swordmaster Wu, I did kill Yang Lin. Nie Tian looked at Xian Zongfeng, took a step forward, and said with a smile, but Yang Lin was seriously injured by Miss Lian Wui before we fought. I just got lucky, so you don't have to be so surprised, Sword Master Wu. Xian Zongfeng frowned and his expression changed. He smiled and said, You're too humble. Wui is my disciple and I know very well what kind of person she is. She won't kill anyone, so even if she injured Yang Lin, it might not be a serious injury. You killed Yang Lin with your own ability, so there's no need to hide anything. Nie Tian's eyes froze. He didn't expect Xian Zongfeng to know Lian Wui so well. Nie Tian didn't know what to say since Xian Zongfeng was so direct. Brother Guiwu, did this young man come with you? Xian Zongfeng smiled and asked Guiwu Kwangsha. Yes. Guiwu Kwangsha nodded and said, His name is Nie Tian, he's my friend. Nie Tian. Xian Zongfeng murmured and glanced at Nie Tian. He said directly, My friend, Nie Tian, are you interested in joining the Shenwu Sword Pagoda? The calm voice caused everyone present to be stunned. Their faces immediately stiffened. Xian Zongfeng's direct invitation to Nie Tian to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda was unexpected. The Shenwu Sword Pagoda was a top force in the 9 territories. Almost all swordsmen wanted to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Xian Zongfeng's direct invitation to Nie Tian was full of sincerity. Nie Tian was also surprised. He then smiled and said, Swordmaster Wu, I didn't come to Evil Wind Island to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. I appreciate your kindness. Appreciate? As soon as Nie Tian finished his words, everyone screamed and stared at him in disbelief. They did not expect him to reject Xian Zongfeng's invitation. The Divine Martial Sword Pagoda was the dream of every swordsman. Now that the Divine Martial Sword Master had personally invited Nie Tian, how could they not be shocked? Nie Tian rejected the invitation on the spot. Xian Zongfeng did not expect this and his expression changed. Lord Swordmaster Wu, Nie Tian is a straightforward person. If he has offended you, please forgive him. Guiwu Kwangsha saw that Xian Zongfeng's expression was not right, so he quickly stepped forward and said, There's nothing wrong with young people being arrogant. Xian Zongfeng forced a smile, but his face did not look good. He suddenly thought of something and said, Nie Tian, you said that you didn't come to Evil Wind Island to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. What's your purpose then? Nie Tian smiled. He said that on purpose so that Xian Zongfeng would take the initiative to ask him. Nie Tian nodded and looked at Xian Zongfeng calmly. Lord Swordmaster Wu, to be honest, I came to Evil Wind Island to ask for a favor. What is it? Xian Zongfeng was stunned and his expression became even more embarrassed. Nie Tian first rejected his invitation and now said that he had a favor to ask. This made him very unhappy. The crowd was shocked. They were all curious about why Nie Tian came to Evil Wind Island. Nie Tian had just rejected Xian Zongfeng's invitation, which made everyone even more curious about his purpose. Lord Swordmaster Wu, I would like to invite the Shenwu Sword Pagoda to hold the Evil Edge Sword competition in advance. Nie Tian looked at Xian Zongfeng and said, What did you say? The calm voice caused Xian Zongfeng to gasp in shock. His expression was stunned, as if he was suspecting that he had heard wrongly. Nie Tian's words also caused a commotion in the crowd. F***CK. Did I hear it wrong? This brat wants the Shenwu Sword Pagoda to hold the Evil Edge Sword competition in advance. Is this silver-haired brat crazy? The Evil Edge Sword competition is held every 30,000 years and it has been like this for 1,000,000 years. Who does this brat think he is? He wants the competition to be brought forward. Is he sure he's not here to be a joke? The Evil Edge Sword competition is a rule that hasn't changed in 1,000,000 years. This brat first rejected Lord Swordmaster Wu's invitation, then he wants the competition to be brought forward. This is a challenge to the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. This brat has guts. Looks like he hasn't learned anything from the three devils of the North Sea. The crowd discussed, and they all thought that Nie Tian was crazy. How could the rules of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda be changed so easily? Even if it was Guiwu Quangsha who said this, he would be mocked, let alone Nie Tian. Lord Swordmaster Wu, I said, I want to ask the Shenwu Sword Pagoda to bring forward the Evil Edge Sword competition. However, Nie Tian completely ignored the crowd's discussion. Instead, he smiled faintly and repeated what he had just said in a very calm manner. Xian Zongfeng's face darkened and his eyes were filled with anger. He confirmed that he didn't hear it wrong and said, Brat, you are challenging the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Challenging the Shenwu Sword Pagoda in front of the Sword Master was definitely a crazy thing to do. Xian Zongfeng's face was dark and he suppressed the anger in his eyes. There was even a hint of murderous intent in them. However, he didn't make a move right away. He was restraining himself. Master, don't be angry. He just saved me Anjua Bufan. Lian Wui noticed Xian Zongfeng's anger and stepped forward to plead for Nie Tian. Lord Swordmaster Wu, I have no intention of challenging the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, but… Nie Tian frowned and was interrupted by Xian Zongfeng. Brother Guiwu. Xian Zongfeng growled and looked at Guiwu Quangsha. You used to be a member of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. You should know what the Evil Edge Sword contest means to the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. For your sake, I will pretend that I didn't hear what he said. Now, please take him away. The Shenwu Sword Pagoda doesn't welcome you. Guiwu Quangsha's face froze and he didn't know what to say. He came with Nie Tian and his status and strength were far above Nie Tian. Xian Zongfeng obviously thought that he was the leader of this matter and not Nie Tian. Xian Zongfeng letting Guiwu Quangsha leave with Nie Tian was already the biggest concession he could make. Compared to dealing with the three devils of the North Sea, Xian Zongfeng was much gentler. Lord Swordmaster Wu, this has nothing to do with Lord Guiwu. He just came with me to Evil Edge Island. At this moment, Nie Tian took a step forward and said calmly, I came to Evil Edge Island for the Evil Edge Sword duel. I won't leave before it's done. His voice was as calm as water, but it was filled with violent contradictions. Everyone's eyes were focused on Nie Tian. No one thought that he would dare to say such a thing under such circumstances. Chapter 1912. With these words, Xian Zongfeng stared at Nie Tian with a gloomy face, his eyes filled with killing intent. Letting Guiwu Sha take Nie Tian away was already the biggest concession he could make. However, Nie Tian didn't know what was good for him and forced him to kill. Guiwu Sha sensed Xian Zongfeng's murderous intent and became nervous. What he was most worried about had happened. Xian Zongfeng dared to kill the three devils of the North Sea, so why would he show mercy to Nie Tian? Guiwu Quangsha couldn't figure out why Nie Tian would mention the Evil Edge Sword competition in front of so many people. Under the watchful eyes of so many people, Xian Zongfeng naturally had to protect the dignity of the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda. The atmosphere at the scene suddenly fell into a suffocating depression. Everyone's eyes were locked on Nie Tian, waiting to see how he would react. If Nie Tian said the wrong thing, Xian Zongfeng would kill him without hesitation. Swordmaster Wu, I would like to ask you a question. How long has it been since the Shenwu Sword Pagoda had a legendary swordsman? Nie Tian's reaction was very calm as he asked with a smile. Xian Zongfeng's face darkened again as he shouted, Kid, are you mocking the Shenwu Sword Pagoda? In the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, there hadn't been a legendary swordsman since the first Sword Master. Everyone in the 9 domains knew about this. Nie Tian's sudden mention of this matter was clearly a provocation. In fact, it wasn't just the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Even the entire 9 domains hadn't had a legendary swordsman in a long time. Shi Tian might be the only swordsman in the 9 domains who had reached the legendary state of sword and martial arts. That was why Gui Wuxiao was so shocked when he saw Di Shitian. I'm just a swordsman of the essence of the sword. How would I dare to mock the Shenwu sword pagoda? Nie Tian smiled and said, Sword Master Wu, if I'm not wrong, your sword cultivation should be at the pinnacle of the realm of sword and martial arts as one. You're only one step away from the legendary state, right? Xian Zongfeng was stunned for a moment. His face darkened as he said, Boy, what are you trying to say? Sword Lord Wu, I have a swordsman with me. I believe that if it's just sword intent, you're no match for him. Nie Tian smiled and continued. Impossible. Xian Zongfeng growled and stared at Nie Tian. No swordsman in the 9 domains has reached the legendary realm of sword and martial unity. The person you are talking about does not exist. Xian Zongfeng's sword Dao cultivation was indeed at the pinnacle of sword and martial arts as one. In terms of combat power, there were indeed a few people in the 9 realms who were above him, such as Sacred Leader 9 Deities Calamity, Wind and Cloud Alliance Master Nie Dao and others. However, in terms of sword Dao strength, there was almost no one who could defeat Xian Zongfeng in terms of sword intent. At least, Xian Zongfeng believed that his sword intent was already at the peak of the 9 realms. Only the other sword master of the divine martial sword pagoda could rival him. He did not care about the other swordsmen. Now that Nie Tian suddenly said that he could find someone who could defeat him in terms of sword intent, how could he believe it? Unless the swordsman's sword Dao cultivation had reached the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. Xian Zongfeng noticed that there was only one expert beside Nie Tian, Guiwu Guangsha. He did not care about the others at all. What if he exists and is right here? Nie Tian smiled as a strange light flashed in his eyes. Xian Zongfeng was stunned for a moment. Then he glanced at everyone present, including Sakura, but he did not feel anything unusual. Finally, he looked at Nie Tian and his face turned cold. His sword momentum suddenly surged and he said coldly, Brat, are you kidding me? Boom. In the blink of an eye, Xian Zongfeng released a terrifying sword momentum. Suddenly, a terrifying sword will spread out. Everyone felt the terrifying pressure and their expressions changed. Their eyes trembled. Nie Tian was the first to feel Xian Zongfeng's sword intent. His expression changed and he said in horror, What a powerful pressure! Xian Zongfeng was still calm. It was obvious that he only wanted to give Nie Tian a warning and did not fully release the pressure. Otherwise, Nie Tian would not be able to withstand it. Di Shitian, it's time for you to show up. Nie Tian tried his best to hold on and said to Di Shitian. A faint smile appeared at the corner of Sakura's mouth. He was a smart person, so he naturally knew how to cooperate with Nie Tian. The divine martial sword pagoda's sword master is a mediocre person with no knowledge, Di Shitian said as he stepped forward. The dull voice fell, but it was like a clap of thunder from the 9th heaven, causing everyone to be stunned for a moment, their eyes trembling as they looked at Sakura. When everyone saw the face of the person who spoke, their expressions froze and they couldn't help but snicker. No one thought that the person who spoke would be a 7-year-old child. However, there were also people who were horrified. They could tell that Di Shitian was the child who blocked Yang Sen's sword for Nie Tian. Little kid, are you mocking me? Xian Zongfeng was taken aback, but he saw Di Shitian's face and couldn't do anything. He could only speak in a cold tone. As the divine martial sword master, it would be too degrading for him to attack a 7-year-old child in public. It's this little brother. At this time, Lian Wui was startled and immediately recognized Di Shitian. She couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Wui, do you know him? Xian Zongfeng looked at Lian Wui. Lian Wui nodded and said, Teacher, he blocked Yang Sen's sword just now. Xian Zongfeng was stunned, his eyes filled with horror. Yang Sen was one of the North Sea's 3 beasts. Although he wasn't a peak powerhouse, he wasn't someone ordinary people could block. If the person in front of him was a young man, Xian Zongfeng wouldn't be surprised at all because he had seen too many geniuses. However, Di Tian was only 6 or 7 years old. His bone age wouldn't lie. A 7-year-old child fighting against the North Sea's 3 beasts was too shocking. You are the swordsman that Nie Tian talked about? Xian Zongfeng was stunned. He suddenly thought of something and asked in horror. Yes. Di Tian nodded and said, "My sword intent is definitely above yours." Everyone was stunned once again as they looked at Sakura in astonishment, their expressions astonished to the extreme. They didn't feel any sword intent fluctuation from Di Tian. It was very strange. Di Tian was a swordsman who had reached the legendary realm of sword and martial arts. He could release and retract his sword intent freely. If he deliberately hid his sword intent, others wouldn't be able to see it. Because of this, everyone ignored his existence. At this moment, Di Tian directly said that his sword intent was above Xian Zongfeng's. One could imagine how shocked everyone was. Xian Zongfeng looked at Di Tian with a complicated expression and didn't speak for a long time. He didn't feel any sword intent fluctuation from Di Tian. This was what surprised him the most. Chapter 1913. Xian Zongfeng was unable to see through Di Tian, and his expression became complicated, revealing a trace of fear. Seeing Xian Zongfeng's reaction, Di Tian's gem-like eyes flickered and said, "Do you dare to compete with me in sword intent?" After he finished speaking, Di Tian released a wave of sword intent. The sword intent soared into the sky, and a faint pressure spread in the space, giving people a feeling of boundless might. Everyone's expression changed, and their faces became incomparably shocked. Sakura Heaven's sword intent seemed weak, but it made people feel that it was boundless and mysterious, so much so that it made people have the urge to prostrate and worship it. This is really... Xian Zongfeng felt the sword intent in the void, and his face became dumbfounded. He was so excited that he couldn't say anything. He was very sure that this was the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. Gui Wuquang Sha's face also became sluggish, and he didn't react for a long time. Nie Tian looked at everyone's exaggerated reaction, and the corner of his mouth slightly smiled. This was the effect he wanted, to let Di Tian amaze the audience. After a while, when everyone's expression slightly recovered, Nie Tian took a step forward, looked at Xian Zongfeng and said, "Sword Lord Wu, now you should believe what I said just now." Xian Zongfeng's eyes trembled, and he nodded. His eyes flashed with unconcealable passion, and then he looked at Di Tian and said, "Lord, I want to compete with you in sword intent." Nie Tian was stunned, and he suspected that he had heard wrongly. Xian Zongfeng clearly knew that Di Tian was a swordsman of the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. Why did he still want to compete with him in sword intent? Wasn't this looking for abuse? However, Nie Tian immediately understood that Xian Zongfeng was unwilling to give up the opportunity to compete with the legendary swordsman of the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. Sure. Di Tian looked at Xian Zongfeng and said lightly. Nie Tian nodded slightly, not worried at all. Since Xian Zongfeng said that it was only a competition of sword intent, then of course, he couldn't use martial arts strength. He was a dignified sword lord, and he certainly wouldn't do something that went against his words. Make your move. Di Tian took a step forward. Although his face was young, he had the demeanor of a master. Xian Zongfeng nodded, his eyes blazing. This was the first time he had fought against a legendary swordsman. Even though he knew that he was no match for him, this experience would still be very beneficial for his future advancement in swordsmanship. It was precisely because of this that Xian Zongfeng took the initiative to compete with Sakura in sword intent. "Sir, be careful!" Xian Zongfeng shouted, and a 3-foot sword appeared in his hand. He thrust it forward, and the sword intent whistled as it attacked towards Di Tian. The corners of Sakura's mouth curled up slightly. His face was calm and tranquil. In the next moment, the heaven-slaughtering sword was unsheathed, and a streak of sword intent shot out like wind and lightning. Bang! The two sword shadows collided in the air. A muffled sound rang out, and one of the sword shadows shattered. Xian Zongfeng's eyes trembled when he saw a sword shadow coming towards him. He quickly took a few steps back, but he was still too slow. A glaring wound was left on his arm. So fast! Everyone's eyes trembled as they cried out in surprise. Most of the people present were swordsmen. Of course, they could see how terrifying Sakra's sword intent was. No wonder he's a swordsman at the legendary realm of sword and martial arts unite. He's really powerful. Guiwu Quangsha's eyes flickered as he was surprised. He finally understood why Nie Tian was so confident that he could persuade the Shenwu Sword Pagoda to bring forward the Evil Edge Sword duel. It turned out that he had Sakra as his trump card. A swordsman at the legendary realm of sword and martial arts unite was enough to change the Shenwu Sword Pagoda's mind. Again, although Xian Zongfeng was injured, he looked very excited. He roared and thrust his sword again. Sakra did not even look at him and thrust his sword forward. A muffled sound rang in the air and Xian Zongfeng's figure took a few steps back. In the blink of an eye, after dozens of strikes, there were dozens of wounds on Xian Zongfeng's body. His body was dripping with blood, but his eyes were very excited. During the fight with Sakra, Xian Zongfeng had some enlightenment, which made him very excited. Everyone was shocked to see the scene in the sky. A 7-year-old child had made the dignified Shenwu sword master covered in blood. How could such a scene not be shocking? After a while, the sword duel between Sakra and Xian Zongfeng ended. The result was self-evident. Sakra completely crushed Xian Zongfeng. Although it was only a small realm difference, the legendary realm of sword and martial arts unite was completely beyond the pinnacle of sword and martial arts unite. Thank you for your guidance. Xian Zongfeng put away his 3-foot hidden edge sword and bowed respectfully. Sakra did not say anything. He only nodded and looked at Nie Tian. Nie Tian smiled faintly and opened 9 extremities to let Sakra enter. Everyone was shocked to see Sakra's figure disappear from Nie Tian's side. They were all wondering what the relationship between Nie Tian and Sakra was. Swordmaster Wu, can we talk about the Evil Peak sword duel now? Nie Tian ignored everyone's reaction and turned to look at Xian Zongfeng. Nie Tian, let's talk inside the city, Xian Zongfeng said with a slight change of expression. Then, under Xian Zongfeng's lead, Nie Tian and the others entered the Shenwu city and went straight to the main hall. Brother Guiwu, Nie Tian, please take a seat. Xian Zongfeng gestured for Guiwu Quangsha and the others to sit, but his expression was not good. The Evil Peak sword duel was very important. After all, it was a rule of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda that could not be broken. Swordmaster Wu, is the Evil Peak sword duel a problem? Nie Tian looked at Xian Zongfeng and asked. Xian Zongfeng nodded and said, the Evil Peak sword duel is held once every 30,000 years. It has not changed for the past 1,000,000 years. There are still a few thousand years until the next Evil Peak sword duel. If it is held earlier, I'm afraid it will damage the Shenwu Sword Pagoda's reputation. Nie Tian frowned slightly. Xian Zongfeng was very concerned about the Shenwu Sword Pagoda's reputation. Perhaps he did not have any selfish motives when he dealt with the 3 devils of the North Sea. He was just trying to protect the Shenwu Sword Pagoda's reputation. Guiwu Quangsha had said before that the 2 sword masters of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda were famous for being stubborn. Now that he saw it, it was indeed true. Swordmaster Wu, can't you make an exception for once? Nie Tian looked at Xian Zongfeng and asked in a deep voice. Xian Zongfeng frowned and said, this is not something I can decide alone. Please stay in the Shenwu city for a few days. I will discuss it with the Divine Sword Master after he finishes his closed-door training. Closed-door training? Nie Tian was stunned. No wonder he had not seen the Divine Sword Master. The latter was in closed-door training. Nie Tian knew that these experts could easily stay in closed-door training for hundreds or even thousands of years. If the Divine Sword Master was in closed-door training for a few hundred years, he would not have that much time to wait. Xian Zongfeng knew what Nie Tian was thinking and said with a faint smile, "Don't worry, the Master of the Divine Sword will come out of seclusion soon." Chapter 1914. The matter of the Evil Peak Sword Discourse was not something that Xian Zongfeng could decide alone. The two sword masters had to discuss it together. The other sword master was currently in closed-door training and would only come out after a few days. Nie Tian and the others decided to stay in the governor's mansion for a few days while waiting for the sword master to come out. "Brother Gui Wu, I will arrange your accommodations." Xian Zongfeng smiled faintly, looking very peaceful. It was like a different person from when he was trying to kill the North Sea's three evils. Nie Tian felt strange about the change in Xian Zongfeng's attitude, but he did not take it to heart. After a while, Nie Tian and the others were led by a guard to a small courtyard in the governor's mansion. "Nie Tian, we will stay here for the time being," Gui Wu Kwangsha said and turned to walk into the courtyard. Jian Jingyun and Gui Wu Kan followed him. Nie Tian nodded slightly and was ready to enter the courtyard. But at this moment, he felt someone coming from behind him. "It's her." Nie Tian turned around and saw an unexpected face. He could not help but be stunned and said in his heart, "What is she doing here?" The person who appeared in front of Nie Tian made him a little surprised. It turned out to be Lien Wui. Nie Tian felt strange. What was Lien Wui doing here? "Miss Lien." Since he had already found Lien Wui, Nie Tian could only greet her. Are you called Nie Tian?" Lien Wui walked over and asked with a slightly embarrassed face. "Miss Lien, is there anything I can help you with?" Nie Tian nodded and smiled. He did not want to waste time on Lien Wui and asked directly. Nie Tian's straightforwardness made Lien Wui blush. She seemed to feel wronged. Then, she suddenly thought of something and said, "You saved me just now. I haven't thanked you yet." "You are welcome. Didn't you plead for me in front of Sword Master Wu?" Nie Tian laughed. Seeing Lien Wui's embarrassment, he did not want to be too cold. At this time, Jian Jingyun and Gui Wuchan hadn't gone far. When they saw Lien Wui, they stopped in their tracks. "Nie Tian, this is your first time in Divine Martial City, right? How about I take you to the sword grounds?" Lien Wui's eyes twinkled with excitement. "Sword Field? What is this place?" Nie Tian was slightly stunned and couldn't help but ask. Lien Wui was much more relaxed. She giggled and said, "The sword field is where we usually train our swords. There are many sword formations there that are very helpful for our sword Dao cultivation. Let's go and take a look." Nie Tian couldn't help but be stunned. The dance costume was too enthusiastic, which made him feel uncomfortable. After thinking for a while, Nie Tian turned around and said to Jian Jingyun and Gui Wushan, "Brother Jian, Brother Gui Wushan, let's go to the sword arena together." Okay. Gui Wukan gave a mischievous smile as he hurriedly agreed. Jian Jingyun was slightly embarrassed, but he still walked over. Lien Wui didn't think much of it. Instead, she was very happy. Under Lien Wui's lead, Nie Tian and the others left the city lord's mansion and headed towards the sword arena. On the way, Lien Wui kept glancing at Nie Tian intentionally or unintentionally, which made him feel very uncomfortable. "Miss Lien, if you have something to say, there is no harm in saying it." Nie Tian finally couldn't bear it anymore and directly said. Lien Wui's small face slightly stiffened, and she immediately blushed. She walked over bashfully and finally mustered up her courage to say, "Nie Tian, actually, I have something to ask of you." "What is it?" Nie Tian was stunned. He didn't expect Lien Wui to really have something to ask of him. "Miss Lien, don't tell me you have taken a fancy to Nie Tian?" Gui Wushan blabbered without thinking and directly let out a strange cry. "Of course not." Lien Wui's charming face blushed all the way to her ears. She quickly denied and said, I just want to see that little brother. Little brother? Nie Tian stared blankly for a moment and immediately reacted. Lien Wui wanted to see Di Shi Tian. Suddenly understanding, Nie Tian couldn't help but let out a long sigh in his heart. Just now, he really thought that Lien Wui had feelings for him, but now it seemed that he was thinking too much. The one that Lien Wui was truly interested in was not Nie Tian, but Di Shi Tian. In fact, it was no wonder. After seeing Di Shi Tian and Xian Zongfeng's sword-intent competition, who wouldn't be interested in Di Shi Tian? Not to mention Lien Wui, perhaps Jian Jingyun and Gui Wushan also wanted to see Di Shi Tian, but the two just didn't say it. I beg you, let that little brother come out to see me. Lien Wui looked at Nie Tian with pleading eyes, her pair of beautiful eyes flashing nonstop. Nie Tian was helpless and could only say, I can let Di Shi Tian come out, as for whether he wants to see you or not, it will depend on your own ability. Good, 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 quickly let him come out. Lien Wui saw that Nie Tian agreed, and quickly nodded in excitement. Nie Tian smiled bitterly. He knew that Di Shi Tian liked peace, and didn't want to have too much contact with other people. Nie Tian opened 9 Extreme, and Di Shi Tian's figure appeared. However, he only glanced at Nie Tian and completely ignored the other people and said, Nie Tian, what's the matter? Although Di Shi Tian looked like he was carved out of jade, like a porcelain doll, the aura of his whole body was very ice-cold, giving people an enormous pressure. Of course, Nie Tian wasn't afraid of Di Shi Tian. He faintly smiled and explained the situation in front of him. Di Shi Tian listened and frowned. He raised his head and glanced at Lien Wui, then said, Little girl, you have already seen me, is there anything else? This. Lien Wui's pretty face stiffened. She had a wronged expression, but she couldn't say anything. Jian Jingyun and Gui Wushan saw that Di Shi Tian was so cold towards a super evildoer like Lien Wui, so they immediately dispelled the idea of asking Di Shi Tian for advice on Sword Dao. Since there's nothing else, I will go back. Di Shi Tian's face was cold. He glanced at Nie Tian and prepared to return to 9 Extreme. Wait! Lien Wui became anxious and directly called out, Little brother, can you play with me for a few days? As soon as Lien Wui said this, the faces of Nie Tian and the others changed and froze. Who would have thought that Lien Wui would actually say such words? Did she treat Di Shi Tian as a toy? And play with her for a few days? Di Shi Tian was a swordsman who had reached the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. He might be the only swordsman in the 9 domains to reach this realm. How could such a person be a match for you to play with? Nie Tian, I am going back. Di Shi Tian's face was cold, but it wasn't good for him to flare up. Nie Tian's face couldn't help but be a little embarrassed. In fact, it was quite stressful for him to be with Di Shi Tian. Only Fat Cat could easily deal with Di Shi Tian. Miss Lien, I am sorry. His temper is like this. Nie Tian smiled helplessly. He then prepared to open 9 Extreme and let Di Shi Tian go back. However, at this moment a familiar voice rang out. Chapter 1915. The sudden appearance of Fat Cat made the scene instantly fall into an awkward situation. Nie Tian looked at Fat Cat with a stiff face and couldn't speak for a long time. Jian Jingyun and Gui Wuchan had a strange expression as they looked at Fat Cat in confusion. This was the first time Lien Wui saw Fat Cat, so her expression was even more exaggerated. Her small mouth opened wide, but she couldn't make a sound for a long time. Boss Chinchilla, Indra looked at Fat Cat with an embarrassed face and didn't know what to say next. He even suspected that he had heard wrongly. Fat Cat actually asked him to accompany Lien Wui to play. Nie Tian reacted and looked at Fat Cat with a puzzled face. He didn't understand why the latter would make such a decision. Little girl, don't worry. In the next few days, Indra will be with you. This sovereign will let him guide you well. Fat Cat completely ignored the reaction of Nie Tian and the others and said to Lien Wui with a proud face, Really? Lien Wui cried out in surprise, and her pretty face was brimming with unconcealable joy. But she didn't believe it and worried that Fat Cat's words were useless. After all, it was just a cat. Could it make a decision for Indra? Lien Wui didn't know the relationship between Fat Cat and Indra at all, so she doubted Fat Cat's prestige. Nye Tian, Fat Cat, Indra, the relationship between the three was a bit subtle. It was like rock paper scissors, balancing and restraining each other. Indra could ignore Nye Tian's words, but he didn't dare to disobey Fat Cat. Of course it's true. Fat Cat smiled faintly, then looked at Indra and said, Indra, you don't have any objections, right? Indra had a helpless expression and finally nodded. Little brother, you really agreed? Lien Wui was surprised and suddenly felt that happiness came too suddenly. Sure Tian, for the next period of time, you should stay with this little girl. Fat Cat chuckled and said, she is an evildoer of the sword Tao, you have to guide her well. Yes. Sakura nodded helplessly with a look of reluctance. It wasn't that he thought the dance clothes were bad, but he had been alone for too long, and he really didn't want to be with others. So you are called Sure Tian. Lien Wui, on the other hand, was very happy. She took a step forward to Sure Tian's side and said, from now on, I'll call you little brother Sure Tian. You can just call me Big Sister Wui. Sakura raised his head and glanced at Lien Wui. His big eyes flickered, and he looked like he wanted to cry but had no tears. Nye Tian smiled bitterly. Only Fat Cat could make Sakura do this. Following that, the crowd continued to move forward and soon arrived at the sword field. This is the sword field. Lien Wui was very excited, and she said to Sakura, little brother Sakura, let's go take a look at the sword formation. After saying that, Lien Wui pulled Sakura to the sword field, and Sakura was completely dragged over. Nye Tian couldn't help but shake his head and smile when he saw this scene. This sword field looks very good. Gue Wukan looked at the sword field and said with a proud face. Nye Tian looked over. The entire sword field was very wide, with a radius of a few dozen miles. There were many arenas on the ground, and many swordsmen were fighting in pairs. High up in the sky, there were many floating sword formations. The sword intent was very strong, and it was very helpful for swordsmen to comprehend the sword Tao. Jian Jingyun, let's go take a look. Gue Wukan chuckled and said to Jian Jingyun. Jian Jingyun nodded, and the two of them entered the sword field. Nye Tian looked at the back of the two people, and he just smiled, but he didn't move. Fat, why do you want Sakura to accompany Lien Wui? Seeing that there was no one around, Nye Tian finally couldn't help but ask the question in his heart. Nye Tian wasn't a fool. Of course, he could see that Fat Cat definitely had a purpose for letting Sakura accompany Lien Wui. At this moment, Fat Cat's expression was somewhat serious. She suddenly looked at Nye Tian and asked, Nye Tian, what do you think of Lien Wui's talent in the sword Tao? Terrifying. Nye Tian thought for a moment and spat out two words. Lien Wui's talent in the sword Tao could only be described with one word, terrifying. Among all the swordsmen that Nye Tian had met, only Cher's talent could surpass Lien Wui's. Nye Tian, do you know that there is a reason why this little girl's talent is so terrifying? Fat Cat said in a deep voice, and her expression was somewhat solemn. What do you mean? Nye Tian was stunned for a moment. He didn't understand what Fat Cat was saying. Fat Cat's gaze trembled slightly. She first sensed for a moment to make sure that there was no one around before she said, Nye Tian, if I'm not wrong, someone planted a blood-weeping sword infant in Lien Wui's body. Blood-weeping sword infant? Hearing this strange name, Nye Tian couldn't help but frown and was stunned for a moment. He had never heard of something like a blood-weeping sword infant. Fat Cat's expression was very ugly. After hesitating for a long time, she finally said, Blood-weeping sword infant is a kind of evil technique to cultivate sword intent. Cultivate sword intent? Nye Tian was stunned, and his expression was incomparably shocked. He only knew that spiritual materials could be cultivated, but he had never heard that sword intent could be cultivated as well. Sword intent wasn't a living thing, so how could it be cultivated? Fat Cat hesitated again and said, "Sword intent is a non-living thing, so it can't be cultivated. However, the blood-weeping sword infant is a very strange, evil technique. This kind of evil technique first plants a blood-weeping sword infant seed in a martial artist's body. Then, the blood-weeping sword infant will continuously absorb the sword intent in the swordsman's body and become stronger and stronger. Moreover, as the blood-weeping sword infant becomes stronger, it also causes the swordsman's sword intent to become stronger. In this way, the blood-weeping sword infant and the swordsman resides in will form a very strange symbiotic relationship. The two will promote each other, fuse with each other, and become stronger together." Nie Tian was stunned on the spot. The things Fat Cat said were too strange and shocked him. After a moment, Nie Tian calmed down a little and said, "Fat, according to what you said, the blood-weeping sword infant doesn't have any disadvantages. Why is it an evil technique?" It was a good thing that the blood-weeping sword infant and the swordsman became stronger together. Although the method was a little evil, it didn't have any disadvantages for the swordsman. Fat Cat shook her head and said, "Although the blood-weeping sword infant and the swordsman become stronger together, the blood-weeping sword infant itself doesn't belong to the swordsman. The blood-weeping sword infant is usually used as a method to plunder sword intent." Plunder sword intent? Nie Tian was stunned again and didn't quite understand. Fat Cat's eyes trembled slightly and she said in a deep voice, "Let me tell you directly. Someone planted the blood-weeping sword infant in Lian Wui's body. Their purpose is to wait until the blood-weeping sword infant matures, so that they can plunder Lian Wui's sword intent." Nie Tian frowned and his face instantly sank. He finally understood. Although the blood-weeping sword infant in Lian Wui's body helped her become stronger, it was also absorbing her sword intent at the same time. When the blood-weeping sword infant matured, someone would take the blood-weeping sword infant from Lian Wui's body and take it for themselves. After understanding all this, Nie Tian's eyes couldn't help but tremble and he sucked in a breath of cold air. Using the blood-weeping sword infant to plunder other people's sword intent. This method was really cruel. At this moment, Nie Tian suddenly thought of a question and he exclaimed, "Who planted the blood-weeping sword infant in Lian Wui's body?" Chapter 1916. Fat Cat looked at Nie Tian with a strange expression, which made the latter nervous. Lian Wui's body had been implanted with a blood-weeping sword infant. Who was the one who had implanted the blood-weeping sword infant? Nie Tian's mind raced. Soon, a name appeared in his mind, and he almost blurted it out. "Profound Hidden Peak. You have a suspect in mind, but don't say it." Fat Cat smiled and guessed what Nie Tian was thinking. It said, "The sooner the blood-weeping sword soul is planted, the better. I speculate that the blood-weeping sword soul was planted when she was still a baby. You can ask Lian Wui about her background later, and see when she came to the Shunwu Sword Pagoda." Okay. Nie Tian nodded with anger in his eyes. Xian Zongfeng was Lian Wui's teacher. If he really planted the blood-weeping sword soul, then this teacher was worse than a pig or a dog. Nie Tian's eyes flickered and he asked, "Little fatty, it's because Lian Wui has the blood-weeping sword infant inside her that you let Sakura follow her, right?" Fat Cat's expression changed slightly. It said, "I felt that the blood-weeping sword soul in Lian Wui's body is unstable, so I let Sakura follow her and give her some pointers to see if he can stabilize the blood-weeping sword soul." The blood-weeping sword soul is unstable? Nie Tian was startled and asked, "Why is that?" Fat Cat sighed and said, "I'm afraid that the person who planted the blood-weeping sword soul couldn't wait any longer and wanted to take the blood-weeping sword soul out of Lian Wui's body in advance." Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. He asked, "If the blood-weeping sword soul is taken out, what will happen to Lian Wui?" "She will die." Little Fat Cat's expression was solemn as it said, The blood-weeping sword infant and the host are in a symbiotic relationship, sharing glory and destruction. If the blood-weeping sword infant is taken out, the host will die without a doubt. When Nie Tian heard Fat Cat's words, his face darkened and became extremely cold. The blood-weeping sword infant was indeed an evil technique. Not only did it steal one's sword intent, it also harmed one's life. The blood-weeping sword infant will only grow faster in the hands of those with outstanding talent. Therefore, the more talented one is in the way of the sword, the easier it is to be targeted. Fat Cat sighed and said, Lian Wui is a sword Dao monster. Even without the blood-weeping sword infant, her sword Dao talent is far above Jian Jingyun and the others. It's not strange that she would be targeted and become the host of the blood-weeping sword infant. He had a feeling that the person who had planted the blood-weeping sword infant in Lian Wui was most likely a member of the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda, and Xian Tsongfeng, the master of the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda, was the prime suspect. However, Nie Tian did not dare to conclude that Xian Zongfeng was the one who planted the crimson blood sword infant in Lian Wui's body. Everything needed to be verified before it could be confirmed. Lian Wui definitely did not know that there was a crimson blood sword infant in her body, and neither did the others. Even Sakura couldn't sense the crimson blood sword infant, let alone the others. Only a monster like Fat Cat would know about the crimson blood sword infant. Nie Tian sighed and regained his composure. He was ready to go to the sword field and experience the sword formation of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. His figure flashed, and he stepped into the sword grounds. However, at this moment, Nie Tian suddenly felt someone behind him. He turned around and saw a familiar person, Liang Chao. When Nie Tian and the others first entered the Shenwu city, they had some conflicts with Liang Chao. Brat, it's you. Liang Chao's eyes flickered when he saw Nie Tian clearly. His expression turned cold and he said, I didn't expect you to dare come to the Shenwu city. Nie Tian once forced Liang Chao to apologize, and the latter's hatred for him was greater than the sky and deeper than the sea. Liang Chao never expected to meet Nie Tian in the sword field of the Shenwu city. To him, this was a heaven-sent opportunity for revenge. The Shenwu city doesn't belong to you. Why can't I come? Nie Tian looked at Liang Chao and smiled provocatively. He then looked at the person behind Liang Chao. A black-clothed swordsman stood behind Liang Chao. He was burly, had a cold expression, and his aura was powerful. What an arrogant brat! Before Liang Chao could speak, the black-clothed martial artist stepped forward and stared at Nie Tian coldly. Brat, do you know who you are talking to? Is that really important? Nie Tian asked with a calm smile. The black-clothed swordsman frowned. He didn't expect Nie Tian's reaction to be so calm. Brother Wu Yan, this brat is the one who injured me in the Shenwu city. Liang Chao looked at Nie Tian with hatred. He's the one who forced me to apologize even though he knew that I have the Shenwu sword soul. Wu Yan's face darkened, and she took a step forward, unleashing terrifying sword energy that bore down on Nie Tian. At the same time, she shouted, Brat, how dare you look down on the Shenwu sword soul? You're courting death. Bam! However, Nie Tian didn't retreat. Instead of retreating, his figure flashed, and a fierce sword intent whizzed out, directly breaking the sword intent's pressure. At the same time, it forced Wu Yan to take a few steps back. You want to defeat me with your sword aura? Aren't you looking down on me a little too much? Nie Tian smiled faintly as he stared at Wu Yan with a playful and provocative look in his eyes. Wu Yan was an early paramount god, and had reached the sword oblivion level. She wasn't weak, but it was impossible for her to defeat Nie Tian with sword energy alone. How is this possible? Wu Yan steadied herself and frowned. Her expression immediately changed as she cried out in alarm. His sword energy was so powerful that even an early overgod wouldn't be able to withstand it. How could Nie Tian, who was only a late high god, break through it so easily? It was too strange. Brother Wu Yan, this brat's strength is very strange. There's a strange rune in his body that can increase his strength by an entire realm. Liang Chao had fought with Nie Tian before, so she hurriedly explained. So that's how it is. Wu Yan sneered. She then calmed down and said, looks like I'll have to show my true strength if I want to defeat him. Nie Tian's lips curled up and he said, I'm just afraid that you won't be my opponent even if you show your true strength. How arrogant! Wu Yan roared and her sword energy surged. She was actually ready to attack. But at that moment a feminine voice rang out. Stop! Lian Wui appeared and looked at Wu Yan angrily. Wu Yan, Nie Tian is an honored guest of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Do you want to fight him? Junior sister. Wu Yan couldn't help but tremble when she saw Lian Wui. She didn't expect her to suddenly appear and speak up for Nie Tian. Lian Wui didn't hold any position in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, but she had a special status. Apart from being the top genius of the pagoda, she was also the disciple of Sword Master Xian Zongfeng. Therefore, everyone in the pagoda had to show her respect. Chapter 1917. What do you think you're doing, Wu Yan? Lian Wui roared anxiously when she saw that Wu Yan wasn't going to stop. Junior apprentice sister, calm down. I'm just teaching him a lesson. I promise I won't kill him. Wu Yan sneered. She then turned to Nie Tian and said, Brat, do you dare to fight me? Wu Yan clearly didn't know what Nie Tian had just done. Therefore, she didn't recognize Nie Tian at all. She only thought that Nie Tian must be taught a lesson for insulting Liang Chao and provoking the divine martial sword soul. Wu Yan, stop pestering me. You're no match for Nie Tian. Lian Wui's beautiful eyes flickered as she said agitatedly. I'm no match for him? Wu Yan stared blankly for a moment. But soon after, she cast a sideways glance at Nie Tian and sneered. Junior martial sister, don't flatter others and belittle yourself. I, Wu Yan, am a dignified divine martial sword soul. Do you think I can't even defeat a high god trash? By this time, a large crowd had gathered around them. Many of them recognized Nie Tian. Their eyes trembled and their faces wore playful smiles. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and his face sank. He took a step forward and said in a cold tone, Did you just say that I'm trash? Wu Yan sneered and said, I'm an early-stage paramount god and I've reached the realm of sword essence. But you're just a late-stage high god. If you're not trash, then what are you? Wu Yan, you've crossed the line. Before Nie Tian could speak, Lian Wui's face darkened. Have I crossed the line? Wu Yan sneered again and said, In my opinion, you've crossed the line by looking down on the divine martial sword soul. You. Lian Wui still wanted to say something, but she was stopped by Nie Tian. Nie Tian's lips curled into a smile. He stared at Wu Yan and said, Since you say that I'm trash, then let this trash have a taste of your skills. You want to fight me? Wu Yan was stunned for a moment before a trace of joy flashed in his eyes. He originally thought that Nie Tian would hide behind Lian Wui. He didn't expect that Nie Tian would take the initiative to challenge him. Isn't he courting death? So many people are waiting to watch. How can I spoil everyone's mood? Nie Tian said with a smile as his gaze swept across the crowd. Wu Yan froze for a moment. Then, he looked at the crowd and noticed that there was something wrong with everyone's gaze. They were all looking at him with a pitiful gaze. Many of the people present had seen Nie Tian kill Yang Lin with a single strike. The latter's strength was far above Wu Yan's. Therefore, everyone believed that Wu Yan was no match for Nie Tian. Strange, why are these people's gazes so strange? Is there something strange about this kid's strength? Wu Yan couldn't help muttering to herself when she saw everyone's gazes. Thinking back to what Lian Wui had just said, Wu Yan's heart thumped even harder. But he had already said it. It was impossible for him to go back on his words. Go ahead. Nie Tian smiled faintly. Since Wu Yan insisted on being abused, how could he refuse? You're just trying to be mysterious. I want to see what kind of ability you have to fight me. Wu Yen roared. He then took a step into the sky. Nie Tian, be careful. Jian Jingyun walked to Nie Tian and whispered. Don't worry. With a faint smile, Nie Tian blurred into action and flew high into the air to confront Wu Yen. Everyone raised their heads and fixed their eyes on Nie Tian and Wu Yen. They were ready to watch a good show. Make your move, Nie Tian said calmly, his face expressionless. Arrogant. Nie Tian's indifference made Wu Yen feel like he was being looked down upon. He roared in anger and a gigantic sword appeared in his hand. His entire body emitted a majestic sword intent. What a rare attribute. Interesting. Nie Tian couldn't help but smile when he sensed Wu Yan's sword intent. Wu Yan's sword intent was a variation of the earth attribute. Hence, Nie Tian judged that this person's sword intent was incomparably ferocious. You're courting death. Wu Yen let out a low roar and slashed out with the huge profound stone sword in her hand. Immediately, a terrifying sword intent appeared in the air and condensed into a profound stone sword shadow. Like a mountain, it crazily pressed down on Nie Tian. Nie Tian's lips curled into a smile. His astral soul wings appeared on his back. His silhouette moved like the wind and lightning, nimbly dodging Wu Yan's attack. Wu Yan's sword intent was majestic, but it wasn't agile enough. It was extremely powerful. If a cultivator of the same level were to face it head-on, they would definitely be at a disadvantage. However, its weakness was that its speed was too slow, making it difficult for him to face his opponent head-on. Against an opponent like Nie Tian who possessed the astral soul wings, Wu Yen appeared extremely clumsy. At this moment, even if Nie Tian didn't use the 3 forbidden techniques, he could still rely on his speed to maintain an invincible position. What a fast speed! This was the first time the crowd saw Nie Tian's speed. They couldn't help but exclaim, "Damn it, die for me!" At this moment, Wu Yen slashed out with his sword again. A violent sword intent whistled through the air, but Nie Tian easily dodged it. Following that, Wu Yen continued to slash out with his sword, but all of them were dodged by Nie Tian. He couldn't cause any damage to Nie Tian at all. Bastard, do you only know how to dodge? Wu Yen was completely enraged. He roared madly, resembling a wild beast that had gone berserk. Dodging is also my ability. Nie Tian smiled faintly. His mocking voice resounded in the air, appearing extremely provocative. One couldn't help but say that Wu Yan's strength had exceeded Nie Tian's expectations. If they were to face each other head-on, Nie Tian really didn't have full confidence that he could defeat Wu Yen. Damn it! Wu Yen was completely enraged. Sword intent gushed out from his body as he slashed down with his huge blackstone sword. Instantly, an endless amount of sword intent spread out, transforming into a blackstone rain that covered the sky and pressed down on Nie Tian. In order to hit Nie Tian, Wu Yen actually chose the stupidest method, which was to disperse his sword intent. Idiot! Sakra's mouth twitched when he saw this scene from below. He spoke in a cold tone. Good chance. Hovering in midair, Nie Tian's mouth curled into a smile. Terrifying black runes were released from his body, and his aura instantly soared to the extreme. Sky-piercing sword. In the next moment, Nie Tian let out a low roar and stabbed out with his starlight heavenly slash. A sword shadow whizzed out like a dragon breaking out of the abyss, rolling and roaring, directly breaking through the blackstone rain in the air. Not good! Wu Yen suddenly felt a wave of sword intent rushing towards her. She screamed in her heart and her eyes trembled. She wanted to make a move, but it was already too late. Bang! With a muffled sound, Wu Yan's figure was directly sent flying. Like a meteor, she turned into a blood-colored trail in the air and landed with a loud bang. She smashed into a martial arts arena, causing the arena to collapse, and a layer of soil rose up from the ground. Hiss! Everyone's gaze followed Wu Yan's figure as she landed on the ground. They all sucked in a breath of cold air, and their faces were filled with shock.